Chapter 39-26. Upon hearing this, Fengjiu broke into a smile. It seems like it's still somewhat useful. She used the green lotus chi to treat him for a while until a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. Only then did she withdraw her hand and say, "I'll try again tomorrow." Have Ling Shuang and the others prepare some water for you. Go take a bath. He said slowly as he pulled down his trousers. Okay. Fengjiu replied. She got up and walked outside to call out. When she saw Ling Hua outside the courtyard, she walked over and asked, "Have you settled Great Master Yi Jie?" "I've already settled Master," Ling Hua said with a smile. "I heard from them that Du Fan and Hui Lang went to book a banquet. They're planning to have some fun tonight." Fengjiu nodded and said, "That's good too. Let's set the banquet in the front courtyard." "Oh right, remember to order a few vegetarian dishes for Great Master Yi Jie. They know that Great Master Yi Jie will also be there, so they'll order a few vegetarian dishes." Ling Hua asked again, "Master, are we leaving together or what? If we leave together, I'll have to deal with the matters of this residence first. Let's go together. I just talked to Mose. He said that we'll leave together so that we can look after each other along the way. Besides, we don't know how long we'll be gone this time," Fengjiu said. She was still a little worried when she thought of the bloody disaster that the white-browed monk had mentioned. If they left together, she was really worried that they would implicate the two children. However, if she sent the two children away, she couldn't bear to and wouldn't feel at ease. No matter what, she wouldn't feel at ease. Bringing them along with her would make her feel at ease. Forget it, forget it. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let nature take its course. All right then. I'll deal with the matters of the residence first tomorrow, Ling Hua said. He bowed and left first. "Master, the bath water is ready." Ling Shuang came over and said. "Okay." Fengjiu said, then turned and walked back. After taking a bath, she changed into a new set of clothes and dried her hair. She thought of the little toys she had bought on the way back to play with, so she walked into the inner room with a smile. "Why aren't these two little fellows sleeping? Aren't you tired of rolling around on the bed?" She smiled and sat down by the bed. She reached out and rubbed the two children's little heads. Looking at the two identical little faces, she couldn't help but smile. "Mose, look at our son and daughter. Why are they so cute? When you grow up in the future, do you think it will still be the same?" The corners of Shenyuan Mose's lips curled up slightly. His eyes were filled with love as he looked at the two fair and tender children. He said, "When they grow up in the future, their appearances will only become more and more beautiful. However, although the two of them look the same, their personalities are as different as heaven and earth." That's true. Our son's character is like yours, and our daughter is like mine." She smiled and took out a wind chime and a windmill from her space. "Little babies, look at what this is." The wind chime gently shook, producing a clear and melodious sound. The rainbow-colored windmill spun, causing the two children to giggle. They stretched out their chubby little hands, wanting to take it. "Do you want it? You don't know how to play with it yet. Mother will let you play with it." She smiled and teased the two children. The rainbow-colored windmill spun in her hand. As the windmill spun, the rainbow-colored ribbons flew. It was very beautiful. "Come, let's go to the front and prepare to eat." She hung the wind chime by the window, then placed the windmill at the head of the small bed where the children slept. Only then did she go forward to pick up the two children. Chapter 39-27. Fengjiu was all smiles as she carried the two children in her arms, one in each hand. Only when she carried them in her arms did she realize how heavy these two little fellows were. Moreover, they were wearing a lot of clothes and their whole bodies were plump. "No, I can't carry two." She hastily put down one of them, fearing that the child in her arms would twist and fall. Ling Shuang, come in and carry the child. Xianyuan Mose called out and let Ling Shuang, who was outside, come in and help carry one child. Ling Shuang, who was waiting outside the room, came in and took the child from Fengjiu. He said, Master, Yama Lord, the banquet in front has already been set up. You can go over now. And, you take you, over first. We'll come in a while. Fengjiu said and let him carry little Yu, to the front. Yes. Ling Shuang answered. After bowing, he carried the child and retreated. Xianyuan Mose got down from the bed and sat in the wheelchair. Looking at her carrying the child, he said, Let's go. Little Mu Chen obediently stayed in Fengjiu's arms. He didn't make a fuss and only quietly looked at her. That well-behaved little appearance made Fengjiu couldn't help but lower her head and kiss him. Son, mother will take you to the front to have some fun. Seeing her kiss his son again, Xianyuan Mose couldn't help but say, this boy can't always be kissed. He'll be shy in the future. Fengjiu's beautiful eyes smiled as she glanced at him and said, yes, yes, yes. If you can't kiss a son, then kissing a daughter is fine, right? Cough, you can also kiss me. He lightly coughed as he looked at her with his deep black eyes. Hearing these words, Fengjiu teasingly smiled. I still remember that time when I accidentally kissed you, you directly fainted. Hearing her mention this matter, Xianyuan Mose was embarrassed and said, let's not talk about the past. Let's go. I don't want them to wait too long. As he spoke, he pushed the wheelchair out. Seeing him walk out, Fengjiu pursed his lips and smiled. He carried the child and followed beside him. In front of them, everyone was gathered. They did not put several tables together. Instead, there was a small rectangular table in front of two people, with wine and dishes on it. Where is Lang Hua? Why haven't I seen him yet? Hui Lang looked around and didn't see Lang Hua, so he asked. He went to invite Master Yi Jie. As Du Fan spoke, he placed wine on everyone's table and said with a smile, Master has been away for half a month, and we've also been idle here for half a month. Now that Master has returned, it feels much livelier. Ling Shuang is here. Is he carrying little Mu Chen or little Yu? Luo Yu stood up and wanted to check on the child, but Hui Lang was faster. He stood up and pressed a hand on Luo Yu's shoulder, forcing him to sit down. Just sit down. I'll carry the little master here. Hui Lang grinned and patted his shoulder. He quickly walked over to Ling Shuang and asked, Ling Shuang, is the child you're carrying little Yu? Yes, Ling Shuang replied. Then, he stepped forward and reached out to take the child from her. Little Yu, was more lively and active. She was used to everyone fighting to carry her, so she didn't cry when Hui Lang carried her. Instead, she giggled and her saliva stained his lapel. Chapter 39-28. Luo Yu cast a glance at him and said, What kind of uncle are you? As he spoke, he also stood up and walked towards him, saying, All right, all right. You'll be fine after holding her for a while. Let me hold her, let me hold her. Hui Lang dodged with the child in his arms and said, What's there to hold? I've only just taken it from you. I haven't even hugged her yet. As he spoke, he retreated until he seemed to have bumped into someone behind him. Be careful, don't hurt the little master. Lang Hua's voice rang out. At the same time, he helped him up, worried that if he didn't hold her firmly, she would hurt the little master. Who would have thought that when he looked into his arms, little Yu's eyes were curved into crescents and she was smiling very happily. The monk at the side looked at the child in Hui Lang's arms and softly said, Amitba. Great monk, we meet again. Hui Lang said as he turned around with the child in his arms. Benefactors and I are fated to meet again, Monk Yijie said as he stood quietly with his eyes lowered. Great monk, this way please. Lang Hua gestured for him to take a seat. As they walked forward, they saw Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mo's coming from not far away. When Hui Lang saw them, he grinned and said, "Master and Madam are here." Monkey Jie's gaze swept past Fengjiu and landed on Xianyuan Mo's, who was sitting in a wheelchair beside her. He was a little surprised to see him in a wheelchair. "Great monk, you don't have to be so restrained here," Fengjiu said with a smile. She carried the child to the front and introduced, "This is my husband, Xianyuan Mo's. This is our son and daughter. Amitba." The monk put his hands together and murmured, "Benefactor, you have both a son and a daughter. You're very blessed." Fengjiu smiled and saw Monkey Jie come to Xianyuan Mo's and bowed. "Yijie greets benefactor. Great monk, you don't have to be so polite. Please take a seat." Xianyuan Mo said and invited him to take a seat. "Thank you, benefactor." As the monk spoke, he nodded slightly at the two people before he was led by Leng Hua to a seat on the side. Fengjiu nodded inwardly when he saw that they had arranged everything well. If a few tables were placed together, then Monk Yijie would definitely not be able to eat at the same table as them. After all, other than wine, there were also meat dishes on the table. Therefore, it was more suitable for them to sit on a small table with food placed on the floor. She glanced at Xianyuan Mo's, who was beside her, and saw him lift his body up. His entire body floated up, and then he sat cross-legged on the soft mat on the floor. Thus, she carried the child and sat down beside him. Seeing that Hui Lang was still hugging little Yu, Fengjiu smiled and said, "Hui Lang, hugging little Yu, won't fill your stomach. Put her on the bamboo chair at the side first. Come, let me do it." Qin Xian stepped forward to take little Yu, and put her on the baby bamboo chair at the side. Then, she went to Fengjiu's side and said, "Master, give me the little masters." "N." Fengjiu responded and handed the child in his arms to her. He said, "Just push them to my side." "Yes." Qin Xian responded and placed the two children on the baby bamboo chair. Then, she moved them to Fengjiu's side. "Master, this is for the two little masters." Bai Qingqing brought the warm goat's milk over. "All right, everyone sit down and eat. Otherwise, the food will get cold." Fengjiu said and indicated for them to sit down. Then, she fed the two children the warm goat's milk. Chapter 39-29. "Amitba, that's right," the monk replied. Xianyuan Mo's played with the wine cup in his hand and said, "Buddhism emphasizes that the four elements are all vanity and the cycle of cause and effect. Since it was you who lost it, why did you think of asking us to find it for you?" The monk looked up at Xianyuan Mo's and said, "There is a cause and effect. The reason why Buddhism sent me and benefactor Feng was because she accepted the ancient golden lotus of Buddhism and promised the holy Buddha. Among millions of people, only benefactor Feng went to the myriad Buddha's sect. Naturally, she is fated to be with Buddhism." Xianyuan Mo's looked up at him and said, "You are a monk. If you travel with us, aren't you afraid of causing gossip? There are thousands of Tao in the world. I walk my own Tao and never care about what others say," he said with his hands together and lowered his eyes. Hearing this, Xianyuan Mo's smiled and said, "Well said. This is a toast to you." As he said this, he raised his cup and drank the wine in the cup. The monk picked up the tea in front of him and said, "I will use tea in place of wine." As he said this, he also bowed. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Fengjiu finished feeding the two children the goat's milk and said with a smile, "Master, try these vegetarian dishes." "Master Yijie, these are the vegetarian dishes that we specially prepared for you," Hui Lang said with a grin. He picked up a piece of meat and said, "If it weren't for the fact that you monks don't eat meat, I would like to invite you to try the taste of this meat." "Amitba. Benefactor, thank you for your kindness. I can eat vegetarian dishes." As he said this, he picked up his chopsticks and bowl and ate quietly. Everyone chatted, drank, and talked about happy things. Time passed quickly. When the banquet was over, everyone dispersed. Fengjiu brought the two children and Xianyuan Mo's back to the courtyard. They stayed here for another 2 days. Fengjiu also helped Xianyuan Mo's heal his legs with the power of the green lotus. However, the power of the green lotus did not return to its peak state. Moreover, it had been used a lot these 2 days, so the power of the green lotus seemed to have weakened. In the main courtyard, Fengjiu sat with Xianyuan Mo's. He looked at the two children in the courtyard and said, I estimate that it will take some time before you can stand up again. Qing Lian's strength is much weaker than before. It will take a few days before she can continue the treatment. It doesn't matter. It'll get better eventually. Just take it slow, Xianyuan Mo said, and then asked, we'll set off tomorrow. Is everything ready? And, don't worry. It's all ready. They're all ready too. Fengjiu smiled and said, I just sent Qin Xian and Fan Lin out to buy some dry food. We can eat it on the road. Hearing this, Xianyuan Mo said, there'll be plenty of food on the road. There'll be wild game everywhere. It's good to prepare some for the monks. Fengjiu smiled and said, it'll be more convenient to prepare some for the road. As soon as she finished speaking, she seemed to sense something and said, it seems like Mo Chen has come out of the ancient golden lotus. I'll ask him to come out. As she said this, she used her mind. A golden light flashed past. In the next moment, Mo Chen, dressed in white, appeared in front of the two. His figure was slightly illusory, as if it was transparent under the sunlight. However, it was real. Chapter 39:30. Mo Chen smiled warmly, I didn't expect it either. His gaze fell on the two children at the side. With a gentle smile, he asked, are these your children? Yes, look at them. Fengjiu went forward and picked up the children from the small bed, they are also your godson and godson. Looking at the two beautiful children, Mo Chen couldn't help but reach out and hold their small hands. He praised, they are so good-looking, just like you and your wife. Fengjiu smiled proudly, of course, they will be more outstanding than us in the future. Ha ha ha, you two are already rare monsters. If they are more outstanding than you, how heaven-defying would that be? He chuckled, looked at the two children, and said, however, these two children are indeed dragons and phoenixes among men. They will not be simple in the future. He turned to look at Xianyuan Mo's. His gaze fell on his legs, and he said, I heard from Audiobook that your legs couldn't stand up after that battle. Perhaps it was because they were corroded by the black lotus of destruction for too long. Now that the ancient golden lotus is here, although she cannot use the power of the golden lotus to heal you, I can give it a try. Hearing this, Fengjiu frowned slightly, your immortal body is not stable now. If you use the power of the golden lotus to heal him, won't you use up the immortal body that you worked so hard to condense? I know that it was not easy for you to condense an immortal body. Audio's power of the green lotus is gradually recovering. With her healing me, it will be fine if I recover slowly. As Xianyuan Mo spoke, he put one hand on his leg, and said, I have been in a wheelchair for a long time. I am not in a hurry. No matter, I was just about to come out to see you. After this time, I will focus on cultivating until I condense an immortal body. Seeing you today, I don't know when we will meet again in the future. He spoke warmly, then smiled at Fengjiu, and said, moreover, your space is full of spiritual energy. It is a place that does not lose to the holy land of Buddhism. Cultivating there will be twice the result with half the effort. Hearing this, Xianyuan Mo's and Fengjiu looked at each other. Xianyuan Mo's asked, in your opinion, how long will it take to condense an immortal body? Is there anything else we can help you with? Mo Chen smiled warmly, and said, I originally thought it would take at least 10 years. However, if I concentrate on cultivating in the space, I might be able to condense an immortal body in a few years. As he spoke, he slowly shook his head. Cultivating an immortal body can only be done by myself. Others can't help me. Then I'll have to trouble you with Mo's leg. As Feng Jiu spoke, she looked at Xianyuan Mo's and said, let Mo Chen treat it. If you combine it with the power of the golden lotus, your leg might recover faster. Xianyuan Mo's looked at Mo Chen, and said, then I will have to trouble you. Mo Chen smiled warmly, and said, we are so familiar with each other. There is no need to say this. He walked forward and stopped in front of Xianyuan Mo's. He clenched his hands, and a golden ray of light flew out from his fingertips and landed on his knees. Xianyuan Mo's felt a warm aura travel from his knees to his feet. This feeling was even stronger than Feng Jiu's power of the green lotus. He could clearly feel a wave of power flowing through his legs. This power made his originally numb legs feel a wave of heat and numbness. Chapter 39-31. Feng Jiu watched as Mo Chen's body gradually turned transparent and could not help but worry. Fortunately, he withdrew his hand after a while and smiled at the two of them. I can only help you up to this point. Xianyuan Mo's feet moved slightly. He looked at him and said, I can feel it now. I think I will be able to stand up very soon. As he spoke, he said solemnly, thank you. That's good. Mo Chen smiled warmly. He looked at the two children and said, this is the first time I am meeting my adopted son and daughter, but I have nothing to give them. Feng Jiu smiled and said, it's okay. You can give them something when you have cultivated an immortal body. Okay. He replied and said, when we meet again in the future, I will give them a gift. He looked at the two of them and said, take care of yourselves. We will meet again in the future. Okay. The two of them replied. Mo Chen's figure turned into a ray of golden light and returned to Feng Jiu's space, attaching himself to the golden lotus. After Feng Jiu placed the two children back on the small bed, he went to Xianyuan Mo's and asked, how is your leg? I can move. He moved slightly and said, but it's still a little difficult to control. Hearing this, Feng Jiu smiled happily. It's good that you can move. If you can move, then you can move more in the next few days. You will be able to stand up in the next few days. Seeing her happy expression, Xianyuan Mo's also smiled. Although he did not want Mo Chen to treat him because he did not want to owe him too much, seeing her so happy, he was relieved. What he owed was still owed. Since he already owed him so much, he would slowly repay him if he had the chance in the future. The next morning, after everything was prepared, they sat in the carriage and leisurely headed out of the city. A few days later, when Feng Jiu and the others were walking on the mountain path, they faintly heard someone calling for help. Almost everyone's eyes turned to the monk walking by the side when they heard the cry for help. Amitabha. The monk put his hands together and seemed to be a little embarrassed. He lowered his eyes and said, saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda. As he spoke, his figure flashed in the direction of the call for help. Seeing this scene, everyone looked at each other helplessly and laughed at the same time. Du Fan shook his head and said with a smile, it has only been a few days since we set off from the city, and this master has already saved people several times. He really has a merciful heart. This monk really likes to meddle in other people's business. Isn't he a monk? Why do you like to meddle in other people's business? Hui Lang kicked a stone and played with a green foxtail in his hand. He looked at the meddlesome monk with a puzzled expression. He's a monk and naturally has compassion in his heart. He can't be considered meddling in other people's business. It's just that his cultivation is different from ours. Chi Kong said. Although he felt helpless, he could understand. After all, Reverend Yi Jie was a Buddhist. When faced with such a situation, he would naturally not stand by and do nothing. However, even he had to admit that he was meddling a little too much. Chapter 39-32. Feng Jiu held the curtain and looked outside. He smiled and said, "What's wrong with that? Since he wants to save people, let him do it. He's only been saving people along the way and hasn't asked us to help him. At most, we'll just slow down the journey. She smiled and said, since he's not in a hurry, there's no need for us to be in a hurry. Her words seemed to be right. Everyone thought to themselves and waited here. Sure enough, not long after, they saw the monk come back. However, unlike before, he was followed by a woman. He, look, the monk came back with a woman. Hui Lang winked and said with a teasing look on his face. In the past, he didn't bring back the people he saved. Why did he bring back a woman this time? Du Fan also raised his eyebrows and looked surprised. Qi Kong glanced and said, he's probably worried. This is the wilderness, and that woman seems to be heavily injured. Feng Zhou looked at the monk and the woman. The former walked slowly with his eyebrows lowered. The latter's face was pale and there were bloodstains and wounds on her body. Moreover, she was walking with a limp. It seemed that she had hurt her foot. Qin Xin, go and bandage that woman's wounds. We'll rest here for a while. Feng Zhou gestured for Qin Xian to help. He also got out of the carriage and wanted to walk with the child. Yes. Qin Xian responded and walked toward Reverend Yi Jia and the woman. Reverend, my master asked me to come over and help this woman treat her wound. Qin Xian said and looked at the woman behind him. Amitabha. Thank you, benefactor. The monk put his palms together and retreated to the side. The pale-faced woman looked at the people in front of her and couldn't help but feel a little timid. She looked at the carriage again, but she couldn't see the people in the carriage. She only saw the handsome men and beautiful women around the carriage. Miss, sit here. Qin Xian said and gestured for her to sit down. At the same time, she took out some medicine from her space. Thank you for your trouble, Mississippi, the woman bowed before sitting down at the side. She then looked at the people resting around the carriage. Even though she had seen many outstanding people, she had rarely seen people with such outstanding temperaments like these people. They were the young masters of aristocratic families. Or was he a disciple of a family? Or a new talent of the sect? Why were all of them so graceful and imposing? Withdrawing her gaze, the woman looked at Qin Xian. Seeing that Qin Xian was concentrating on cleaning her wound without even asking her a single question, she felt even more uncertain. Who were these people? How could she be with a monk? She's only sprained her ankle, but her other wounds aren't too serious either. With proper rest, she'll recover in less than 2 days, Qin Xin said as she packed up her things. She took a glance at the woman before returning to the carriage. At that moment, in the carriage, Monk was talking to Feng Zhou. Oh. So you want to take her with you? Feng Zhou raised her eyebrows and looked at Master Yi Jia. No, I just want to put her down when we reach a place with other people. Monk lowered his eyes and said. Feng Zhou smiled and said, Reverend, she is not an ordinary person. She is a cultivator. Even if she is injured, I think she can still walk on her own. Chapter 39-33. Amitabha. When we reach the village or the city, I will let her leave on her own, the monk said and bowed to Feng Zhou. Then, he walked towards the girl. Feng Zhou carried the 2 children and walked around. When she was about to return to the carriage to continue their journey, she suddenly heard messy footsteps coming towards them. She looked in that direction and was a little surprised. There were very few people in this place. How could there be messy footsteps? Moreover, that direction seemed to be the direction where the monk and the girl came from. Amitabha. The monk sighed softly. Looking at the 20 or so people coming from that direction, he said regretfully, I let them live, but I didn't expect them to bring people here. Master, do you kill? Luo Yu looked at the monk with a smile, as if he was watching a good show. I don't kill. The monk said and added, but if it's someone who is wicked beyond redemption, I will get rid of him. It seems that you are not a stubborn person, Hui Lang said, and was a little surprised. Perhaps it was because they had been traveling together for a few days and he often saw him meddling in other people's business. Hui Lang's words became more casual. Monk. Hand them over to us. Hey, look, these girls are even prettier than the previous one, the leader of the group said and looked straight at Qin Xin and Bai Qingcheng. Seeing those people looking at them, the two girls only glanced at them coldly and retreated to the side of the carriage. Big brother, these people don't look like ordinary people. Could he be the son of some aristocratic family? You see, all of them look so outstanding. Don't provoke someone you shouldn't provoke. A tall and thin man at the back said, looking at the group of people with some fear. Ha 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 ha. Two children's giggles came from the carriage. The two ignorant children were playing with Fengjiu in the carriage and laughed happily. Listen, there are children's laughter. It seems that they are just a parade of some rich family. As the leader spoke, his eyes were still fixed on Qin Xin and Bai Qingcheng. There were only two beautiful women in his eyes. Quick, catch them for me. The man said and added, be careful, don't hurt the two beauties. Du Fan and the others leisurely glanced at those people. They really couldn't put these rogue cultivators in their eyes. To them, that little bit of strength was really not enough. Master, what do you think we should do with these people? Du Fan asked as he gently fanned himself with the fan in his hand. He looked at the monk with a smile. Amitba, let this poor monk handle it. As he spoke, he took off a string of Buddhist prayer beads from his neck and threw them at those people. When the Buddhist prayer beads were thrown, he clasped his hands together and chanted. Look, the monk's Buddhist prayer beads are actually a magic weapon. Hui Lang looked at the string of Buddhist prayer beads that had become bigger in surprise. He saw that the Buddhist prayer beads had trapped more than 20 rogue cultivators in it. A Buddhist light was released from the Buddhist prayer beads, which shocked them and made them unable to escape. Those people held their heads and rolled on the ground. Vaguely, they heard a complicated and incomprehensible Buddhist chant coming from the monk's mouth. Accompanied by the Buddhist light, it enveloped those people. Chapter 39-34. Fengjiu, who had just boarded the carriage, took a look and saw that those people were hugging their heads and howling in pain. As the initial howls gradually subsided, their expressions gradually calmed down. However, something still didn't seem right. Upon closer inspection, the spiritual aura on their bodies had completely dissipated. Moreover, their eyes were lifeless, as if they had suffered a heavy blow. She raised her eyebrows and her clear eyes fell on the monk. She didn't expect that he would cripple their cultivation as soon as he made a move. Moreover, from the looks of these people's situation, he had used the light of Buddha to attack their divine senses. Their divine senses had been severely injured and they were now like idiots. She retracted her gaze and lowered the curtain of the carriage. She said to Xianyuan Mose, it seems that Master Yi Jia isn't an inflexible person. Crippling those people's cultivation and injuring their divine senses like idiots, what was the difference between this and killing them? No, it should be said that it was more terrifying than death, right? If he did it, at least they'd still be alive. If Hui Lang and the others did it, even living would be an extravagant hope, Xianyuan Mose said as he picked up his son, who had crawled to his leg, and held him in his arms. Hearing his words, Fengjiu smiled and glanced outside again. She saw that the monk had already put away the string of Buddha beads. He chanted a sentence in the Buddhist language and then stood quietly to the side. Seeing this, she said to Leng Hua outside, let's go after we've dealt with them. See if we can find a village or town to rest before it gets dark. Yes, Leng Hua replied and said to everyone, then continued driving the carriage forward. However, along the way, they didn't expect to see any villages or towns. On the other side, the sky gradually darkened as if it was going to rain. Master, it looks like it's going to rain. There doesn't seem to be any shelter around here, Leng Hua said and looked up at the sky. Xianyuan Mose lifted the curtain and looked at the sky. His brows furrowed, and he said, "This rain should be extremely heavy, and it should be accompanied by thunder. Let's speed up and see if there's any shelter up ahead." "Yes," Leng Hua replied. Then, he saw the monk walking behind him come forward. "Benefactor, there will be a fork in the road ahead. Take the road on the right and walk for a while before you reach a ruined temple. We can take shelter there from the rain." Upon hearing this, Leng Hua glanced at the monk and asked, "Master, have you been there before?" "I've been here before, so I'm quite familiar with this area." He put his palms together and said, "Leng Hua, listen to the master. Turn right when you reach the fork." Feng Jiu's voice came from the carriage. "Yes." Leng Hua replied and sped up the carriage. Du Fan and the others who were following him on his left and right stood with their hands behind their backs. Their figures swept against the wind, and their speed also increased rapidly. The woman following behind them was already injured. In addition, her strength was not as strong as theirs. At this moment, when she saw them speed up, her speed fell behind. She could not help but feel anxious. "Benefactor, it doesn't matter if you're slower. You're injured. Even if you're not injured, you can't keep up with their speed." The monk walked unhurriedly beside the woman and said. He was not anxious to be left behind when the group in front of them sped up. Instead, he walked at a steady pace. When the woman heard this, she glanced at the monk. She hesitated and asked, "Master, who are they?" Chapter 39-35. Feeling uncomfortable under his gaze, the woman said, "I overstepped my boundaries." The monk shifted his gaze and looked ahead, saying, "They didn't ask who you are. Benefactor, it's best that you don't ask who they are. If your injuries are better, you can leave on your own without waiting for a village or town." Hearing the monk's words, the woman's heart trembled. She didn't know what to think, but she didn't dare to look at him. She only responded in a low voice and walked beside him. The wind whistled and blew from the surroundings, bringing with it a trace of coldness. The sky was covered with dark clouds. Before they reached the temple, it had already started to rain. The wind and rain brought along with it, causing the temperature to plummet. Du Fan and the others used their spiritual energy to protect their bodies, so they weren't drenched by the rain. However, as the wind and rain blew, the curtain of the carriage was slightly lifted, and the faint sound of children crying could be heard from inside. They were a little anxious. Didn't they say there was a temple in front? Why haven't we seen it yet? Luo Yu said as he rushed forward, intending to scout ahead. In the carriage, Xianyuan Mose and Feng Jiu wrapped the two children in blankets and carried them in their arms to prevent them from catching a cold. The carriage moved quickly and wasn't very stable. Sitting inside, they swayed slightly. However, not long after, Luo Yu's voice came from the front. "It's here. The temple is here." Leng Hua drove the carriage forward, and the others followed. Not long after, when they arrived in front of the temple, they were slightly stunned. This is a rundown temple. This is the temple that the monk was talking about. Hui Lang went forward to take a look. Seeing that there were no leaks, he said, "Fortunately, there are no leaks. Just make do with it and it won't shelter you from the rain." Since they were outside, this was the best they could do. Although it was a little run down, it could at least shelter them from the wind and rain. He didn't have much to nitpick about. Feng Jiu carried the two children out of the carriage and walked towards the rundown temple. Xianyuan Mose followed behind. Although he had regained some feeling in his legs, he still needed time to recover if he wanted to stand up and walk on his own. Therefore, he spent most of his time outside in a wheelchair. The group of people entered the dilapidated temple. The carriage was also pulled to a place under the eaves where it could shelter them from the rain. Once inside, the cold wind whistled. They laid a clean mat in a place where the wind could not reach. Only then did they let Xianyuanmo's and Fengjiu sit down to rest. There are a few broken door bolts over there. Let's set them up to block the wind and rain. To prevent the wind and rain from blowing in. As Qi Kong spoke, he swept the door board clean and used it to block the wind and rain. There are branches in the corner. As Du Fan spoke, he picked up the branch and brought it to the front where Fengjiu and the others were sitting. He lit a fire to warm them up. Grandmaster Yi Jie hasn't arrived yet. Leave the door open for him to enter. Fengjiu instructed. He carried the two children and dressed them in many layers of clothes. Then, he wrapped them in blankets and carried them in his arms. Xianyuanmo's took out a cloak from his space and draped it over Fengjiu. He said, "Put this on. Don't catch a cold." Fengjiu smiled and said, "I won't. After all, the spiritual energy in my body can drive away the cold." As she spoke, she looked at the others and said, "Everyone sit down and rest. We can only make do here for the night." Chapter 39-36. Upon hearing this, Leng Hua smiled gently and said, "I don't have any branches, but I do have a lot of firewood in my space." Du Fan was startled and asked, "Firewood? When did you start storing firewood in your space?" "We haven't lived in this house for long, but everything inside is complete. When I tidied up the house, I brought everything that might be useful." Leng Hua said gently. After all, he was born poor, so there were many things that he wouldn't waste. In particular, he had several space rings that could store a lot of things. Therefore, when they were about to leave, he would take most of the things with him in case they would be useful in the future. "Ha ha ha, Leng Hua, we can rest assured when you do things." Luo Yu patted him on the shoulder and said, "Then light another bonfire here. At least it'll be warmer." Thus, Leng Hua reached out and took out the firewood from his space and piled it to the side. "I'll cook some porridge for the young masters," Qin Xin said with a smile as she prepared to cook the porridge. As they spoke, they heard footsteps coming from outside. Not long after, they saw the monk and the woman walk in. They looked over and saw that there wasn't a single drop of water on the monk's body, but the woman's clothes and hair were wet. "Master, come over here and warm yourself by the fire," Fengjiu said with a smile and invited him to sit by the fire. "Thank you, almsgiver," the monk said as he walked forward. The woman hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to follow him, Leng Shuang stopped her. "Go over there," Leng Hua said and gestured to a corner. Frightened by his indifference and imposing manner, the woman didn't dare to say anything. She just responded and walked to the corner. "Master, have some dry food." Leng Hua took out the dry food and took out a barbecue rack from his space to heat it up over the fire. "Thank you, almsgiver," Monkey Jie said as he took the rations and tore off a small piece to eat. Hui Lang saw him eating by himself and ignoring the woman in the corner, so he purposely asked with a grin, "Monk, you're a monk after all. Why are you eating all the food you have and not giving some to the woman you saved?" Fengjiu looked at him disapprovingly. He felt that Hui Lang had gone overboard. Noticing Fengjiu's gaze, Hui Lang rubbed his nose and smiled awkwardly. "Madam, I'm just curious." He didn't have any ill intentions. He just wanted to know why the monk could eat the food without asking the woman if she wanted to eat. Monkey Jie swallowed a piece of dry rations before saying, "This penniless monk can't even save myself, so how can I save others?" Hui Lang was perplexed by the genteel words. He looked at Du Fan and asked in a low voice, "What does he mean? What do you mean by not being able to save yourself? What redeeming people? What does he mean?" Du Fan smiled and opened the fan in his hand. "What he means is that his rations are also given to him by others. Therefore, if he can't even save himself, he naturally can't help others." Leng Hua smiled and took some dry rations to the corner and handed them to the woman. "Miss, have some." "Thank you, young master." She quickly stood up and thanked him as she took the dry rations. After Lang Hua turned and walked away, she took the dry rations and sat down. She ate them in small bites while looking at these strange people. Chapter 39-37. Everyone sat around the bonfire and chatted idly. They even warmed up some wine to warm their bodies. However, as the sky outside grew darker, there seemed to be the sound of horse hooves approaching. Almost as soon as they heard the sound of horse hooves coming from outside, Du Fan and the others who were sitting by the bonfire stood up. "I'll go and see who it is." As Du Fan spoke, he stepped outside. Unexpectedly, before he could reach the door that was blocking the way, the door was kicked open by a strong force. Bang! The sound of a heavy impact and the cracking of wooden planks was heard. Even though it was a rainy night, it was extremely loud and clear. As a result, it frightened the two children who were nestled in Fengjiu and Xianyuan Moza's arms, who were about to fall asleep. Wah! Wah wah! The two children were startled by the sudden sound of the door being kicked open. Their small bodies trembled and they burst into tears. Seeing that the two children were frightened, Xianyuan Moza's aura immediately turned cold. That strong and intimidating aura mixed with a murderous aura filled the air. Monkey Jie, who was sitting next to them, couldn't help but lower his eyes and murmur softly, "Amitba." Fengjiu's brows furrowed slightly. Her clear eyes were filled with a cold light as she looked at the temple's door. She comforted the two children, "Be good, don't cry. Mother is here." She gently coaxed them and gently patted the child's back with one hand. Perhaps it was because he heard Fengjiu's gentle voice and felt her familiar aura. Little Mu Chen in her arms pursed his little mouth and sobbed softly. However, he stopped crying and only blinked his clear and watery eyes innocently at her. "It's all right. Father and Mother are here. Father and Mother are here to accompany you. It's all right." Fengjiu gently coaxed. Seeing that her son had stopped crying, the girl was still crying at the top of her lungs. "Come, let me carry him." As Fengjiu spoke, she passed her son, who had stopped crying, to Xianyuan Mo's. She then took her daughter, who was crying non-stop. Xianyuan Mo's was worried that his aura would scare the child, so when he heard Fengjiu's voice, he restrained his anger and hugged his son, who was blinking at him, and ordered in a deep voice, "Don't let any of them in." His deep voice was filled with a powerful aura. Even though it was just a sentence, it was enough to make people feel an intimidating pressure. Hui Lang and the others were already angry when they saw the people outside kick open the door and scare the two children. Now that they heard their master's words, they immediately stood up. He really needs to be taught a lesson. As Hui Lang spoke, he prepared to attack the person who kicked the door open. Who would have thought that Du Fan, who had stepped forward first, had already sent out a stream of air with the fan in his hand when the person kicked the wooden door open and stepped in. Whoosh! Bang! With a whoosh, the stream of air from the fan attacked the person who was stepping in at a speed that was too fast for one to cover one's ears. With a muffled groan, the person's figure flew backward until he fell into the wind outside. Pooh! The person who fell to the ground clutched his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. He tried to stand up, but who knew that he would fall back down halfway. Chapter 39-38. Useless people. Kill them. The voice that came from the carriage was low and vicious. The moment the voice echoed, the face of the cultivator on the ground turned pale. Before he could beg for mercy, the cultivator in front of him moved. A ray of cold light flashed by and cut off the cultivator's head with one slash. This scene was witnessed by Du Fan, Hui Lang, and the others who were standing at the entrance of the temple. They saw that person's head and body scattered on the ground in the wind and rain. His blood flowed into the soil along with the rain. When they saw that those people were all expressionless, they instinctively became vigilant and carefully sized up those people outside. They saw that there were about 30 people in the group outside. There were about 10 people in front of each group. These people were all riding horses and wearing special armor. They were protecting the luxurious carriage in the middle. They couldn't see who was inside the carriage, but they could tell that the cultivators riding the horses were all rare experts. The most important thing was the baleful aura on their bodies. That's right, it was baleful aura. It was the kind of baleful aura that only people whose hands were stained with blood would have. These people had it. If there was a difference between these people and their baleful aura, it could only be said that their baleful aura was restrained, while these people's baleful aura was released. The rain fell from their bodies. They didn't use spiritual energy to protect their bodies. Instead, they allowed the rain to fall on their bodies and drench them. At first glance, the horses they rode looked like ordinary horses. However, upon closer inspection, it wasn't difficult to see that they were single-horned spirit beasts. Who were these people who suddenly appeared in the rainy night? What kind of person would he be if he would open his mouth and kill the people under him? Before seeing the other party, just by looking at these cultivators riding on spirit beasts and horses, they could conclude that no matter who the other party was, they were not good people. Furthermore, they could be classified as a dangerous person. Give up the temple and I can consider leaving your corpses intact. An arrogant and sinister voice came from the luxurious carriage. When Lang Hua and the others heard this, they sneered, "Leave our corpses intact. How arrogant. I'd like to see if I really have that ability." Hui Lang said. In the next moment, his figure swept out and attacked the cultivator in front of him. His attack was extremely fast, and it was a killing move. However, what he did not expect was that the move that he thought would be able to kill his opponent with one strike only scratched his shoulder. Seeing the cultivator quickly retreat, Hui Lang stared at him, then looked at the sword in his hand, and said, "The armor you're wearing is quite thick. That sword didn't make you bleed?" He held the long sword in his hand, and the spiritual energy in his body surged. A sharp sword aura accompanied his figure as it swept out. This attack avoided the place where the opponent was wearing armor, and instead focused on other weak spots. As the two of them fought, neither Du Fan's group nor the cultivators riding in the rain made a move to help. It was as if the fight had nothing to do with them. Swish! Ah! A swift and fierce stream of air gushed out and an arm was chopped off and sent flying. Blood spurted out and the sword slashed out once more. A miserable shriek rang out as the battle between the two of them came to an end. Chapter 39-39. The horsemen narrowed their eyes when they saw this scene. They did not expect the people in this rundown temple to be so strong. The person sitting in the luxurious carriage was silent for a while. Then a cold word came out from his mouth. "Kill." After the horsemen were killed by Hui Lang, the other party did not retreat but instead stared at them. Du Fan and the others were already on guard. Therefore, when they heard the cold and murderous voice, they quickly spread out and guarded the four corners of the rundown temple, not letting the battle outside affect their master. Dozens of sword shadows attacked from outside. The people in the rundown temple could clearly feel the strong murderous aura. Hearing the sounds of battle outside, the woman who was curled up in the corner carefully looked outside. When she saw the guards outside, her pupils constricted and she shrank further into the corner. Her face, which was already pale, became even paler after seeing those people. "Do you know who they are?" Fengjiu's voice slowly came out, looking at the woman in the corner. Hearing this voice, the woman looked at Fengjiu and said in a trembling voice, They are the black guards of the Demon King. They have killed countless people and are very strong. It is said that those who have seen them are all dead. Fengjiu raised his eyebrows and looked at the monk who was chanting with his hands clasped together. He asked, "Master, have you heard of them?" "Amitba. Everyone in this area knows of the Azura King's great name. It's just that this poor monk has never met you before," he said slowly and looked outside. The windshield door had been kicked down. Sitting in his position, he could see the battle outside and the luxurious black carriage in the wind and rain. However, in addition to these, he also saw a strong and cold aura around the carriage, as well as countless grievances and the smell of blood. He sighed softly and murmured Buddhist words. Then, he lowered his eyes and silently chanted Buddhist scriptures. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, she could not send the two children into the space. Therefore, she handed the children to Xianyuan Mose and said, "Take care of the children. I will go take a look." "Yes." Xianyuan Mose responded and placed the two children beside him. He used his own aura to protect them so that they would not be affected by the murderous aura and powerful pressure outside. Fengjiu walked to the entrance of the temple and watched. The 8 captains of the Phoenix Guard, Du Fan, Hui Lang, and the others had all joined the battle. Leng Hua, Bai Qingqing, and Leng Shuang, Qin Xian, and the others were guarding the entrance of the temple. In the dark, Ying Yi was keeping watch. The saber lights and sword shadows flashed in the wind and rain. A horrifying murderous aura tore through the rain. The smell of blood, together with the aura of death, permeated the air and was washed away by the rain. The luxurious black carriage was still parked there, neither advancing nor retreating. The surrounding sword chi was unable to harm him at all. Was the Azura king the one sitting inside? She observed these cavalry guards. They were not as strong as Qi Kong and the others, but they were well trained. Perhaps they knew that they were no match for Qi Kong and the others in a one-on-one battle, so they set up a killing formation. They attacked together and retreated together. Their cooperation was flawless. Qi Kong and the others could not do anything to them. Chapter 39-40. In the black carriage, through the front partition, the man sitting in the carriage narrowed his eyes and stared at the red figure standing in front of the temple gate. His sharp and powerful gaze unscrupulously sized her up. Outstanding temperament, a beautiful face, an exquisite figure, and a breathtaking aura. It was very dazzling. He stared at her, and it was unknown what he was thinking. Fengjiu's gaze moved away from the people fighting and coldly looked at the carriage, as if she was looking at the people inside through the carriage. That gaze didn't move away. Although she didn't see it, she knew that the other party was staring at her. That gaze was aggressive and unscrupulous. Her palm moved and a silver needle was clamped between her fingertips. She looked at the people fighting and her gaze swept over one of the people in the attack formation. She moved the spiritual power in her hand and a cold light instantly attacked. There was a slight sound of air being covered by the wind and rain, and a cold light flashed. Just as the silver needle was about to shoot into one of the people's body, a clang was heard. She watched as the light streaked across the rainy night and hit the silver needle, knocking it to the ground. Fengjiu raised her eyebrows and looked at the silver needle being knocked to the ground, and the corners of her lips curled up in surprise. In the next moment, she moved her hand again and several silver needles shot out. As expected, the person in the carriage attacked again. Just as the several streams of air were released, she flipped her palm and a palm wind shot out with the force of thunder towards the carriage. A powerful aura accompanied by wind blades swept out, and the wind and rain in the air were blown to the side and rolled toward the carriage. The one-horned spirit horse in front of the carriage was panicked by the attack of the air and retracted its front hooves, raising its head in neighing. The carriage shook because of the spirit horse's panic. The two guards riding the carriage quickly tightened the reins. At this time, a stream of air came out of the carriage and pushed the spirit horses back, making them stay on the ground. At the same time, it also stabilized the shaking carriage. Fengjiu's eyes flashed when she saw the carriage being pushed back. Her hand flashed, and a sword chi shot out at the two spirit horses pulling the carriage at a speed that was too fast for one to cover their ears. When the other party saw Fengjiu making a move, he also made a move to block it. Surprisingly, he was also able to neutralize Fengjiu's attack. The two of them, one standing under the eaves, and the other sitting in the carriage, exchanged blows. Whoosh! Boom! The sharp sound of air currents streaked across the rainy night. The two air currents fiercely collided with each other, producing a loud rumbling sound. The powerful air currents rippled out like water ripples. The two chi blended together and attacked the two groups of people who were fighting. Pooh! The air hit Chi Kong and the other guards, and the two people fighting were instantly scattered. Chi Kong and the others were stronger, and they quickly stabilized their bodies and retreated. However, the other party's strength was not as strong as Chi Kong and the others. After being hit, some of them spat out blood, some groaned, and some fell to the ground. Seeing this scene, Fengjiu put one hand behind her back and raised the other hand, indicating Chi Kong and the others to retreat to the side. The other party also retreated at this moment and stood guard beside the black carriage, waiting for orders from the carriage. Chapter 39-41. Fengjiu's lips curled into a cold smile when she saw the figure charging towards her. Her opponent was at the level of a high god while she had yet to fully recover her powers. It could be said that there was still some distance between them if they really fought. Earlier on, the two of them seemed to be evenly matched. If they were to fight again, she might be the one at a disadvantage. Furthermore, she did not want to fight with her opponent directly. Hence, when she saw that the figure was attacking her directly, she moved her lips and spoke in a clear and cold voice. Fire Phoenix. As soon as she spoke, a flame shot out with a swoosh. It was so fast that the surrounding cavalry could not see what it was. Only the black figure who had rushed out saw the flame and narrowed his eyes. He seemed to want to avoid it. However, the flame spread its wings, screeched, and swooped down to attack him. Whoosh! Swoosh! Bang! The man used all his strength to resist. His powerful aura collided with the air current of the Fire Phoenix. The two forces fought against each other and the air current surged in both directions. The man was pushed back by the air current of the Fire Phoenix until his body could no longer withstand the powerful ancient aura and the terrifying air current. He was finally sent flying with a bang. Pfft! The man spat out a mouthful of blood. The robe in front of his chest had been burned by the Fire Phoenix's flames. A faint burnt smell filled the air. The man screamed, as if he was in great pain. His body flipped in mid-air and quickly steadied himself before landing on the ground. However, after landing on the ground, he swayed as if he was about to fall over at any time. The Fire Phoenix did not give him any time to catch his breath. It spread its powerful wings and flew up again with flames. The moment it released its ancient aura, the cavalry turned pale and bent over. Even the spiritual horses neighed and knelt on the ground, not daring to move. Go! The Azura King snorted coldly and threw out an object. The next moment, the cavalry that had been rendered immobile by the pressure instantly turned into rays of light and flew into the scroll thrown out by the Azura King. As the Azura King's robe fluttered, he was quickly teleported away and disappeared into thin air. The Fire Phoenix's attack missed. It flapped its wings and with a flash of light, it transformed into a small bird and landed on Fengjiu's shoulder. Master, they escaped. Fengjiu looked at the rainy night and said, that man's powerful and has a life-saving treasure on him. It won't be easy to kill him. As she spoke, she turned to look at the Fire Phoenix and smiled, your power has increased. Outside, Fengjiu and the Fire Phoenix were talking. Chi Kong and the rest had already walked to the side. In the corner, the woman who had curled up into a ball looked outside in shock. She looked at the Fire Phoenix and Fengjiu, unable to regain her senses for a long time. Fengjiu looked at Chi Kong and the rest. Seeing that they were not injured, he said, let's go in. As he spoke, he turned and walked inside. Du Fan smiled and looked at the spiritual horses and the black horse carriage that were still kneeling in the rainy night. He said, those people escaped in a hurry and abandoned these single-horned spiritual horses. It's a waste to leave them here. Ha ha ha, they rushed into the city and sold them. They can still make a lot of money. As Luo Yu spoke, he walked into the rain. Chapter 39-42. Seeing Fengjiu enter, Xianyuan Mose extended his hand. Fengjiu smiled and reached out to take his hand and sat down beside him. The monk saw this and softly murmured, Amitabha. Then he lowered his eyes and silently recited the Heart Sutra. How is it? Xianyuan Mose asked. Although it was a sentence that came out of nowhere, Fengjiu knew what he meant. She said, he's very strong, and his cultivation method is very strange. I reckon that even if Qi Kong and the others fought with him, it would be very difficult for them to defeat him. She paused for a moment before continuing, it's just that I let him escape this time. I reckon that we'll have another feud. Her original intention was to let the Fire Phoenix come out and give him a fatal blow to prevent future troubles. Who knew that in the end, he would still escape? It's okay. Just be careful in the future. He said slowly. That night, the rain continued to fall. Some distance away, the Azura King and his men were in a sorry state as they were drenched in the rain. The cavalry used their cloaks to shield the Demon King from the rain. However, the rain was too heavy. The rainwater seeped through the cloaks and dripped onto his head and the mask on his face. She couldn't see his face, but she could see his red hair, which was different from ordinary people's, and his cold eyes, which were suffused with a bloody light. His chest was burnt, but at this moment, under the rain, the smell of burnt flesh had already dissipated. Only a piece of burnt flesh was left, and it was a ghastly sight. Master, apply some medicine on your wound. One of the cavalry mustered up his courage and said. But who knew that as soon as he spoke, he was sent flying by a gust of wind and landed heavily on the mountain path. The Demon King's gaze was gloomy as he looked at the cavalry who had been sent flying and was kneeling on the ground. His gloomy voice was filled with hostility. This wound is my humiliation. I want to keep it as a constant reminder. Hearing this, the cavalry did not dare to say anything about applying medicine. However, one of them hesitated and said, Master, who are those people? How can they be so strong? And that fire bird, isn't that the ancient divine beast Fire Phoenix? When the Demon King heard this, his gloomy eyes flashed with a cold light. He said, possessing the ancient divine beast Fire Phoenix, that person should be the ghost Dr. Fengjiu. Ghost Dr. Fengjiu? The cavalry looked at each other. They had never heard of this person. However, hearing their master's words, it seemed that this ghost Dr. Fengjiu was very powerful and famous. The Demon King did not say anything more to them and only narrowed his eyes as he stared in the direction of the ruined temple. Ghost Dr. Fengjiu. Who would have thought that the woman who was a legend in many places would actually appear here? When he thought about how there was no monarch in this area and how she had appeared here, the aura on his body became even colder. He had long since regarded this area as his, and if anyone dared to have any ideas about it, then he would definitely not let that person off. As for the ghost Dr. Fengjiu, that woman, not only did she possess great power and stunning beauty, she was also a legend in many places. If he, just as this thought flashed through his mind, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly streaked across the sky. Then, with a loud bang, a bolt of heavenly lightning struck down from the sky with a cracking sound. It struck the tree that the Azura King was sitting on at a speed that was too fast for one to cover their ears. Bang! Chapter 39-43. Kacha. The large tree was split into two halves with a kacha and the flames started to burn. Those people finally regained their senses and quickly dodged. However, their bodies were already charred by the lightning and they were in a sorry state. They all stood by the mountain path and looked at the flames that were burning in the rain and were extinguished by the rain. They were all stunned. With their cultivation and strength, they were actually struck by lightning on this rainy day. They carefully looked at their master. When they saw the aura on his body, they felt as if their hearts were being squeezed tightly by a hand, making it difficult for them to breathe. In particular, when they saw that the ends of his scarlet-red hair were stained with sparks of fire, and there was a trace of a burnt smell, it made them feel even more terrified. They did not have the guts to step forward and extinguish the fire for their master. However, when they saw the small flame burning his hair, they were extremely terrified. Fortunately, not long after, they saw him raise his hand and extinguish the small flame at the tip of his hair. Only then did they secretly heave a sigh of relief. The rain continued to fall and there was nowhere to shelter them from the rain. The guards could only endure the fear in their hearts and step forward to block the rain for their master. At this moment, the demon king's body was filled with a murderous aura. That ruthless aura made the people around him not dare to breathe loudly. They could only hope that the rain would stop as soon as possible. However, the rain continued to fall until the next morning before gradually stopping. Fengjiu and the rest who were in the rundown temple walked out when they saw that the rain had stopped. The sky after the rain was exceptionally blue and the air was very fresh. Fengjiu looked at the spirit horses that were tied together outside and could not help but smile. "Master, are we going to continue our journey?" Du Fan asked. He was already sitting in the black horse carriage and was prepared to bring the carriage along to sell it. After all, these were their spoils of war. Let's go. Ride the spirit horses and sit in the carriage. It's faster to walk." Fengjiu smiled and let them choose their own. He turned around and said to the monk, "Master, you can sit in the carriage." The monk glanced at the black horse carriage and softly muttered, "Amitabha, this poor monk can walk." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Fengjiu. "Master, monks shouldn't stick to one pattern." Hearing this, the monk didn't say anything else. He glanced at Fengjiu and said, "Amitabha, this poor monk will listen to benefactor's arrangements." With that, he walked towards the carriage. The resentment and baleful aura around the carriage dispersed after the Azura king left. Even so, in the eyes of the monk, the carriage was still stained with the smell of blood. Xianyuan Mose got into the carriage, and by Qincheng and Qin Xian carried their children up. They also chose a spirit beast horse to ride. When everyone was ready, the woman who was hiding in the corner walked out from behind. She glanced at them, as if she wanted to follow them but didn't dare to. "Your injuries are almost healed. Leave on your own." Leng Hua glanced at her, paused for a moment, then pulled out a spirit horse. "This mount is for you." The woman looked at the mount and backed away with a pale face. No, I don't need this. I can walk on my own." Chapter 39-44. Seeing this, Leng Hua only smiled gently and tied up the spirit beast horse. The group continued forward. The woman watched them leave and hesitated for a moment before heading in another direction. A day later, they entered the city. As soon as they entered the city, they felt that some of the cultivators in the city were looking at them strangely. That kind of sizing up gaze was filled with scrutiny and surprise, as if there was something they didn't know. "Why are the people in the city staring at us? Although we are very outstanding, there's no need to stare at us like this, right?" Hui Lang rubbed his chin and pulled the spirit beast horse forward. Suddenly, he grinned proudly. "They must have seen us leading so many spirit beasts, or perhaps, they know that these spirit beast horses belong to the Azura king. Or has the news of the Azura king's defeat already spread?" Du Fan patted his shoulder and said, "You're thinking too much." His voice paused and he looked around before saying, "But we still have to be careful. I feel that their gazes are unfriendly." It was one thing in the past, but now that there were two more young masters, he had to be more careful in everything he did. "You two come with me and take these spirit beast horses to the auction house to auction." Du Fan said and glanced at Hui Lang and Lu Yun beside him. "All right, then tell master and the others to go to the inn to rest first. We'll go back now. Lu Yun said and pulled the rope tied to Chi Kong and the others' hands over. I'll go tell them. Du Fan walked forward and came to Feng Zhou's carriage to tell them. At this time, the monk on the black horse carriage opened the curtain and walked down, saying to Du Fan, "Benefactor, this poor monk can just walk here." Saying this, he walked to Feng Zhou's carriage and said, "This poor monk wants to visit an old friend in the city, so I won't be staying in the same inn as Benefactor." "How long does Benefactor plan to stay here?" "When the time comes, this poor monk will come to meet you." Hearing this, Feng Zhou, who was in the carriage, lifted the curtain and threw a jade tablet to him. He smiled and said, "Master, I'll inform you when the time comes." "All right." As the monk spoke, he put his palms together and bowed to her before leaving. "Go. Take that carriage with you, don't leave it behind," Feng Zhou said, lowering the curtain to let Leng Hua continue forward to find an inn to stay. After watching them leave, Du Fan said to Hui Lang and the other man, "Let's go. After auctioning off these things, we'll go around the city and buy some things back. Then let's buy some alcohol later. Let's see if there's any good spirit wine. I don't have much wine left in my space, so I'll buy some." As Hui Lang spoke, he pulled the rope and urged the spirit horses forward. He asked, "Where is this auction?" "We need to find someone to ask." "I just asked. It's still some distance from here. Come with me," Lu Yun said and led them forward. 2 out of the 3 of them were driving 30 spirit horses, while the other person was driving the carriage. As they walked on the street, it could be said that the people around them automatically made way for them. Each and every one of them was looking at them strangely. Seeing the 3 of them going to the auction house, a few rogue cultivators who were drinking tea on the side of the road looked at each other and asked, "Is it these people?" Chapter 39-45. When Du Fan and the others brought the spirit horses to the auction house, the middle-aged man at the reception looked at the spirit horses with cold sweat and gulped. "What? You're not going to accept them?" Du Fan raised his eyebrows and looked at him. He looked at the spirit horses and finally gritted his teeth and said, "Please wait for a moment, I'll get our head steward." With that, he quickly turned and walked inside. Inside, the middle-aged man found a man who was slightly older than him and said, "Head steward, there are a few people outside. They pulled some spirit horses and a black horse carriage and said that they want to sell it to us. What do you think?" Hearing this, the head steward who was talking to the 2 old men paused and asked, "Is it the rumor outside? It seems to be true, so we don't dare to accept it." The head steward lowered his voice and said. The 2 old men who were drinking tea at the side heard this and looked at each other. One of them smiled and said, "I'm curious, what is it that your auction house doesn't dare to accept?" "Yes. Let's hear it," the other old man said. Hearing this, the head steward said, "There are a few people outside who want to sell something, but the thing they want to sell is a little tricky. It can be said that it's a hot potato." "What kind of hot potato? Why does it sound like it's a little tricky? Is there a rumor?" the old man asked. "You don't know?" This time, it was the head steward's turn to be surprised. He looked at them and said, "These days, the heavenly Tao has been saying that the Azura king met a few very powerful people in a rundown temple. Not only was he injured, but he also fled in a sorry state. He didn't even care about his mount. So when the people outside pulled the spirit horses into the city, the people in the city guessed that it was those people who spread the news." Hearing this, the 2 old men looked at each other in surprise. One of them asked, "Who is so powerful? What about those people outside? It seems like it's true, but..." Before he could finish, he saw the middle-aged man beside him pull him, as if to remind him that those people were still waiting outside. "I'll go take a look first, I'll come back in a bit." Just as he was about to leave, the 2 elders also stood up, and said with a smile, "Let's also go take a look." Thus, the few of them walked out together. Just as Du Fan and the others were waiting impatiently, they saw a few people walk out from inside. Seeing those people staring at them and sizing them up, Grey Wolf stepped forward and asked, "How is it? Do you accept it or not? If you don't accept it, we'll have to find another one." He. The chief manager chuckled and said, "Sir, I reckon that no one else besides us would dare to accept these items." He smiled and said to the steward at the side, "Let the people below take those spirit beasts away and estimate the price of the items. I'll have a chat with these young masters and pay them the money later." Yes. Only then did the steward order his subordinates to bring the spirit beast horses and carriages to the side to check and appraise them. "Sirs, please come in and have some tea," the great manager said and gestured for them to enter. Seeing this, Du Fan nodded at Hui Lang and the others, then stepped inside. Not long after they sat down inside, Hui Lang asked, "What do you mean by what you said just now? What do you mean that no one else would dare to accept it? Do you know where our items came from?" Chapter 39-46. Seeing this, Du Fan smiled. It seemed that this auction house had a very strong backer as well. "Do you know what rumors have been spreading about you recently?" the head manager asked as his gaze fell upon them. Du Fan smiled, "It doesn't matter what rumors have been spreading, because we don't care." Hearing this confidence, the head manager's eyes flashed, "You're very confident. Since that's the case, I won't say much." When the two elders heard this, they could not help but glance at the head manager. They looked at each other, and one of them could not help but ask, "Did you really fight with the Azura King? It said that they threw away their armor and fled, is that true? If it wasn't true, these things wouldn't be here." Hui Lang grinned and took a bite of the pastry on the table. "You dare to accept these things from us, it seems that you're quite brave." When they heard this, they only smiled and did not say anything. The Azura King was not the only force on this mainland. Since they dared to accept these things, they naturally had a certain backing. "If you have other things in the future, you can also bring them to us," the head manager said to them. Just as he was about to say something else, a white-haired elder walked in from outside. When he saw the elder, a strange look flashed across the head manager's eyes. He quickly stood up and bowed, "Elder Lin." "Greetings, Elder Lin." The two elders at the side also hurriedly stood up and bowed. Compared to how casual they were before, they were now much more restrained because of the elder's appearance. The elder responded, but did not look at them. Instead, his gaze fell upon Du Fan and the others. His gaze was scrutinizing and sizing them up, and there was also an obvious aura of a superior. As the elder sized them up, Du Fan and the others also looked at him. A trace of surprise flashed across their hearts, because the elder's aura was very unfathomable, giving them a very dangerous feeling. "You may leave." He waved his hand, gesturing for the head manager and the other two to leave. Hearing this, the head manager and the other two looked at each other before replying, "Yes." Then, they respectfully left. Seeing this, Du Fan raised an eyebrow and said to the manager, "Tell the cashier to hurry up. We don't have much time to wait here." "Are you the ghost doctor's underlings?" the old man asked, looking at them. Without waiting for them to speak, he said, "Since the few of you are here, it seems that the ghost doctor is also here." Hearing this, Hui Lang rubbed his chin. Lu Yun's expression was normal. Du Fan brushed his robe and stood up. He said to Hui Lang and Lu Yun, "Let's go. He's going to collect the debt." Perhaps because he was ignored, the old man's face darkened. He clasped his hands behind his back and narrowed his eyes as he watched them leave. He did not follow them. However, after they had collected the debt and left the auction house, the old man with his hands behind his back also walked out. He restrained his aura and followed behind them. Du Fan and the others took the money from selling their items and walked into the wine shop. After buying some things and putting them into the space, the three of them turned into an alley. Chapter 39:47. Hee, I was wondering who had the guts to follow us. I didn't expect it to be you. He rubbed his fists and stretched his muscles, making cracking sounds as he approached step by step. Lu Yun stood on the wall of the alley and looked at the old man who was surrounded in the middle. His spiritual power surged as if he was ready to make a move at any time. The fan in Du Fan's hand opened with a swoosh and he fanned himself from time to time. With a cordial smile on his face, he looked at the old man and said, "What do you want to do?" The old man looked at Du Fan and felt that although he was smiling, it made his hair stand on end. Moreover, his aura seemed to have been released, which was different from when he was in the auction house. Could it be that this was their true strength and the momentum they should have? He couldn't help but take a step back and look at them warily. "Since you followed us out, why don't you tell us how you know about the ghost doctor?" Du Fan fanned himself lightly and walked forward step by step. The news that they had come here seemed to have quietly spread. These people guessed their identity as soon as they saw them. This really surprised him. Didn't this continent not know about the outside world? Where did he get the news about them from? The old man saw that the situation was not right. He turned his palm and a teleportation scroll appeared in his hand. However, before he could open it, the man holding the fan in front of him and smiling amiably had already arrived in front of him. A fierce attack came, making him unable to care about anything else and could only defend himself. Hui Lang and Lu Yun stood in place and watched. When they saw the two people fighting, the aura in the alley spread. They looked at each other and Hui Lang walked out of the alley while Lu Yun continued to watch from the top of the alley wall. Because of their fight, the increase in their combat strength, the fluctuation of energy, and the aura of powerhouses spread out, some nearby cultivators noticed and came over to see what was going on. Hui Lang leaned on the alley with his arms crossed. When he saw two cultivators coming over, he reached out and stopped them. "They're settling personal matters inside. Don't join in the fun." The two cultivators were stopped by him. Their eyes flashed as they looked at him and didn't speak loudly for a while. Not far behind, some cultivators were looking at the grey wolf while whispering to the people beside them. After a while, the 10 or so cultivators walked over. Before they even got close, they were already sneering at the grey wolf. "This alley doesn't belong to you. Why don't you let us get close?" As soon as his voice fell, he said to the two cultivators who were stopped, "This person is an outsider. He just entered the city this morning." What he meant was that this person was an outsider and had no background here. Even if they attacked him, there was nothing to worry about. "However, I saw you take a lot of things to auction house this morning." As the cultivators spoke, they stared at Hui Lang with ill intentions. "Bye." When the two cultivators heard this, greed appeared in their eyes. They were about to turn around and leave, but just as they turned around, several hidden weapons appeared in their hands. Chapter 39:48. The two of them only saw a black figure flash past in front of them. Then, they felt as if their muscles and bones had been twisted. With a cracking sound, they screamed in pain, and the world in front of them spun. The dozen or so cultivators looked ahead with pale faces. They saw that the two cultivators were twisted into a circle and tied together. Their bodies were arched backward, and only their abdomens were stuck to the ground. Their hands and feet were twisted and tied together. There was no rope, but they were twisted and tied together. Hearing the screams of the two people, cold sweat broke out on their foreheads, and they could not help but step back. "Want to leave?" Hui Lang clapped his hands, twisted his shoulders, and walked toward the dozen or so people. "Didn't you want to see my treasure? Come on." He stretched out his finger and made a beckoning gesture at them. "A misunderstanding, misunderstanding." The cultivators hurriedly said, their voices trembling uncontrollably. He, it's good that you misunderstood. Hui Lang grinned. It wasn't easy for me to move my hands and feet. How could I let you run away? He stopped and looked at them with his arms crossed. Do you want to come over yourself? Or do you want me to go over? When the dozen or so people heard this, they were so scared that they immediately turned around and ran. However, who knew that a force sucked them from behind and threw them all to the corner of the wall? Ah! Hiss! One by one, they cried out in pain. Before they could stand up, the black figure rushed forward, lifted them up, twisted them, and threw them to the side. For a moment, only the screams could be heard, and the people who heard it could not help but feel a chill run up from the soles of their feet. In particular, this was not in the alley, but at the entrance of the alley. Many people on the street outside saw this scene, but no one dared to go forward. Hui Lang took everything from them, then snorted and kicked them. Get lost. If there's a next time, I'll take your lives. Those people's hands and feet were tied together, and they were kicked to the corner of the road by him. They struggled for a long time but could not break free. They could only cry for help and cry out in pain. While Hui Lang was dealing with these people, in the alley, the old man was already hung upside down by Lu Yun, hanging on the wall of the alley. Du Fan gently patted his chest with the fan in his hand, fanning himself. Looking at the pale old man with blood seeping from the corner of his mouth, he smiled. Now, are you going to speak? The old man gasped for breath, his arms hanging limply by his side. It was obvious that they had been broken. His face was pale, and there was no fear in his eyes. There was only hostility. You dare to touch me like this? Aren't you afraid of the forces behind us taking revenge? Du Fan smiled with a cordial look on his face. Since you know that our master is the ghost doctor, then you should have heard of her great name. Do you think that we would be afraid of the power behind you? Humph. No matter how strong you are, even if your master is the ghost doctor, if you dare to go against us, it will be difficult for you to leave this mainland alive. Hearing the old man's words, Hui Lang stepped forward and punched him hard in the stomach. Old thing, you really want to die too slowly. Chapter 39-49. Du Fan looked at the old man who was hanging upside down. Not only was blood flowing from his mouth, but blood was also flowing from his nose. However, the old man did not show the slightest bit of fear, as if he was already prepared to die. Seeing this, his eyes flashed slightly. The old man's strength could be considered an overlord, and he seemed to be an elder in the auction house. For someone like him, perhaps death was not frightening, but it would be difficult to get information out of someone who was not afraid of death. It was not that there was no way to get information out of him. After all, other than their interrogation methods, their master also had a kind of pill that could make people tell the truth. However, that pill was not very effective for people with strong willpower like him. He thought for a while, then waved his hand and said, "Forget it, let him go." Lu Yun did not say anything, but Hui Lang glared at him. Let him go. Let him go just like that. Yes, let him go. Du Fan gently fanned himself with the fan in his hand. He looked at the tortured old man and said, this can be considered a lesson for him. Let him go. If they killed him, they probably would not be able to live in peace here. Although he was just passing by, he did not want to disturb his master and the others with such trivial matters. Hui Lang wanted to say something, but seeing that Lu Yun had already put the old man down, he did not speak again. Let's go. The three of them said as they walked out of the alley. However, they did not expect that the old man would sneer, and a sinister voice came from his mouth that was overflowing with blood. Are you afraid? Unfortunately, it's too late. Hearing this, Du Fan raised his eyebrows and looked back at him. Hui Lang looked back at the old man with a dark face and said, Old man, it seems that you really don't want to live anymore. They had already spared his life, but he still dared to provoke them again and again. They really did not know what he was thinking. Should we take him back? Lu Yun looked at Du Fan and asked. He felt that leaving the old man here would be a disaster. Who knew what he would do when he turned around? Du Fan shook his head and said, "Let's go. Don't mind him." He walked out of the alley. When Hui Lang and Lu Yun saw this, they didn't say anything more and just left with him. On the street outside, Hui Lang couldn't help but ask, "Du Fan, why did you let him go? Wouldn't killing him solve everything?" Du Fan smiled and said, "After all, he hasn't made any real threats yet. If we kill him, then even if we are reasonable, we will become unreasonable. Since he followed us today, we will teach him a lesson. If he dares to do it again, then we will just kill him." Hui Lang grinned from ear to ear when he heard him say that he could just kill him. He liked this kind of clean and efficient way of doing things. He had already given the old man a way out, and now it was up to the old man to make his own choice. However, from what he had said just now, it was obvious that he would still come looking for death. Well, it seemed that he would have to sharpen his knife when he went back. Not long after the three of them left, the cultivators outside the alley cautiously looked inside. When one of them recognized the old man as an auction house elder, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He quickly called for the people beside him to quickly send the old man back. Chapter 3950. After Du Fan and the others arrived at the inn, the other two went to rest first, while Du Fan went to Fengjiu's room to report the matter. You did well," Fengjiu nodded and said, "using peaceful means before resorting to force is a method that no one can find fault with." Du Fan smiled and said, "But this way, I reckon that our journey won't be peaceful. I'm afraid that the two young masters will be frightened again. They won't be so timid." Fengjiu smiled and said, "You should also go and rest. They probably won't make a move here, so there's no need to be too nervous." "Yes." Du Fan replied. He bowed and retreated out of the room. Xianyuan Mose, who was sitting in the inner room, rubbed his knees. He stood up and walked a few steps, then raised his leg to kick. He felt that his strength was not enough, and after walking a few steps, he felt a little sore, so he went to the table and sat down to rest. "You still don't have any strength?" Fengjiu asked. "It's a little sore, and I don't have enough strength," Xianyuan Mose said as he rubbed the acupuncture points on his knees. Fengjiu thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, then we can only find tiger bones and tendons to use as medicine." She thought to herself, but tiger bones and tendons are not easy to find. If we didn't have a falling out with this auction house, we could have used the auction house to find them. But looking at the current situation, we have to think of another way. She stood up and said, "We've been on the road these past few days, so I haven't made a medicinal bath for you to soak in. Tonight, you can soak in a medicinal bath. I'll have someone prepare it now." As she said this, she walked outside and called for Fan Lin and Qin Xian to prepare it. Xianyuan Mose, who was in the room, saw that she had arranged for the two of them to be together again. When she returned, he asked, "You want to make them a couple?" Fengjiu smiled and said, "The two of them are very compatible. Moreover, I only pulled them together because I saw that they were interested in each other. It can't be considered a forced pair. It can only be said that I pushed the boat along." She was married and had Mose as her companion, as well as a pair of adorable children. However, the people around her were still single. As their master, if there was someone suitable, she naturally hoped that they could find their own happiness. It would take some time to prepare for the medicinal bath at night. Fengjiu first helped Xianyuan Mose with the silver needles, and then said, "Let them play with the two children. I'll go take a look. You go to bed and rest for a while. I'll come back later." "Okay," Xianyuan Mose responded. He felt that his legs were hot and numb, so he went to bed to rest for a while. The others were playing with the two children in Leng Hua's room. When they saw Fengjiu come in, they bowed to her and called out, "Master." "They didn't cry, right?" Fengjiu asked with a smile as she looked at the two children in their arms. "No, the two little masters are very obedient." Fengjiu nodded when she heard this. She looked at Qi Kong and said, "Qi Kong, come over here. I have something to tell you." As she spoke, she sat down at the table. Everyone in the room looked at each other and their gazes fell on Qi Kong. When Qi Kong saw this, he walked up to the table and asked, "Master, what do you want me to do? I need tiger bones and tendons, but they are difficult to find, so I want you to go out and find out where in the city they can be found." As Fengjiu spoke, she poured a cup of tea and drank it. Chapter 39:51. With regards to something as precious as the tiger bone tendon, it could be said that one only needed to inquire a little to obtain it. After all, there were only a few aristocratic families in the city, and it was not difficult for those who wanted to obtain information. Because of this, Qi Kong returned to the inn in the evening. "Master, this tiger bone tendon can only be found at the auction house. I heard that they had just obtained it some time ago." There were a few groups of people who wanted to buy it from the auction house, but the auction house did not seem to have any intention of auctioning it. Hearing Qi Kang's words, Fengjiu nodded slightly. The tiger bone tendon can only be used as medicine when it is air-dried from the hind hoof of an adult dual-fanged northwestern tiger. Because an adult dual-fanged northwestern tiger is difficult to find, its tiger bone tendon is very precious. It is normal that they are unwilling to auction it. Fengjiu said slowly, one hand supporting his chin, the other playing with the teacup, thinking. Seeing this, Qi Kong said, "Since they don't dare to sell it, why don't I go to the auction house tonight?" The tiger bone tendon could not only restore the strength of the muscles and bones, but if it was refined by an alchemist, it could also strengthen the body's muscles and veins. Perhaps it was because of this that the auction house was unwilling to auction it. If the tiger bone tendon was refined with other elixirs and then auctioned, the price would be much higher. "No need, I will go by myself tonight," Fengjiu said, waving his hand to dismiss him. When the sky gradually darkened, she asked Fan Lin to prepare the medicinal bath for Xianyuan Mose to soak in. She also instructed them to take good care of the two children, and took advantage of the night to go to the auction house. At this time, in the auction house, there was a heavy atmosphere. The atmosphere was oppressive, and the people below did not even dare to breathe loudly. The elder in charge of the auction house was actually carried back with heavy injuries. This was like a bolt from the blue to them, and they were so frightened that their faces turned pale. The head steward waited by the elder's bedside to take care of him, not daring to be negligent. Outside the door, there were more than 10 stewards of the auction house. They looked at the tightly shut door with a heavy heart. The elder was injured to this extent. If the higher-ups were to blame them, wouldn't they also suffer a calamity? Ever since the elder was sent back, the chief steward had already sent a message to the higher-ups. However, there was still no one coming down to deal with this matter. They waited here in a panic, not knowing what to do. They're coming," a steward hurriedly ran in and shouted. He quickly walked into the courtyard and stood where the others were. When the others heard his words, they hurriedly stood up straight and looked at the courtyard door. 2 gray-robed old men walked in with their hands behind their backs. Behind them were 8 cultivators with concealed auras. As soon as they walked in, the entire courtyard seemed to be enveloped by a powerful pressure. They couldn't help but lower their heads, not daring to look directly at them. When the head steward heard the commotion outside, he hurriedly came out to greet them. When he saw the 2 old men, he bowed and respectfully bowed to them. Then, he gestured for them to enter. The 8 cultivators behind them did not follow them in. They only stood in the courtyard and watched as the door was closed, blocking the view of the room inside. Only then did they withdraw their gazes. Chapter 39:52. One of the elders stepped forward to examine him. His expression was gloomy and unsightly. When the elder beside him saw this, he asked, "How are your injuries?" "The tendons and veins in both of his arms have been broken and it's not easy to recover. His internal injuries are extremely severe. Even with top-grade pills, he'll need to recuperate for a month before he can get out of bed and walk around." As the elder who knew medicine spoke, he looked at the person lying on the bed and asked, "Who injured you to this extent?" "Fengjiu, that ghost Dr. Fengjiu." The elder on the bed gritted his teeth and spat out the name word by word. Hearing this, the two elders' expressions changed. "Ghost Dr. Fengjiu? You're talking about that Fengjiu? Fengjiu was the one who injured you?" "She wasn't the one who injured me, but it was one of her subordinates." The elder panted as he spoke. Perhaps it was because of his emotions, but his forehead was once again covered in cold sweat and he coughed twice. When the elder who knew medicine saw this, he flipped his palm and took out a pill and stuffed it into the elder's mouth, saying, "Your injuries are not light. Don't be angry and recuperate first. We'll report this matter to the Lord. Now that they're in this city, we can't let them escape." As the elder spoke, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes, muttering, "This enmity must be avenged." The two of them went outside and gestured for the head steward to follow them. When they were outside, the two elders looked at the head steward and asked, "What exactly is going on? Tell us in detail." The head steward did not dare to hide anything and hurriedly told them about how Du Fan and the others had brought their spirit beasts and carriages to the auction house, as well as how the elder had been carried back. "You're saying that they've already fought with the Demon King, and that the Demon King's men were defeated by Fengjiu?" One of the elders asked, his eyes filled with shock. The great manager nodded his head and replied, "Yes, I heard that they lost miserably. Furthermore, there's news from the underworld that the Azura King has issued a kill order. I don't think their journey will be too peaceful." The other person was silent for a while, then said, "According to the news we've received, this ghost Dr. Fengjiu came to this mainland for the ancient Golden Lotus. I've also heard that she's already obtained the ancient Golden Lotus. She should have left this mainland, so why would she come here? I'm not sure about that, no matter how hard we tried." Then, he hurriedly added, "However, I've sent my men to keep an eye on them." The two. Looking at the items placed in the storage room, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. She never thought that this unremarkable auction house would have so many treasures. She rummaged through the room, but did not take anything else, because her goal was only the tiger bones and tendons. However, after searching for the time it takes for a joss stick to burn, she still could not find the tiger bones and tendons. She stopped and skimmed through the places that she had not searched yet. Finally, her gaze landed on a long black box on the second shelf in the corner. She walked forward and took it down. Opening it, she could not help but smile. Chapter 39:53. So you're saying that if something goes wrong, his hands will droop weakly in the future? This was the voice of an elder. Yes, his injuries are in his meridians. The meridians in his arms have been broken, and it's not something that can be healed with ordinary medicine. However, according to the manager, the auction house has not sold the tiger bone tendons yet. If we use the tiger bone tendons to refine pills, it should be able to heal his hands. The other person said slowly. In the storeroom, Fengjiu's eyes flashed as she heard the voices getting closer and closer. When the door to the storeroom was pushed open, she hid in the void. The door to the storeroom was pushed open, and two elders walked in, chatting as they walked. This ghost Dr. Fengjiu is so powerful. If the Lord goes up against her, will he be at a disadvantage like the Demon King? Last time, I heard the Lord mention that Fengjiu's strength has regressed since that big battle. It has only been a year since then, and the Demon King's strength is not weak either. I reckon that he was too careless and fell into Fengjiu's trap. If the Lord and the Demon King joined forces to deal with her, the result would naturally be different. Although that's the case, I still feel a little uneasy. After all, Fengjiu's name is too well known. Countless people have been defeated by her, and now that the ancient golden lotus is in her hands, it's really a little. You're worrying too much. We've been by the Lord's side for so long, you should know that the Lord's strength is not necessarily inferior to Fengjiu's. Furthermore, we've already reported this matter back and are only waiting for the Lord's orders. Now, we just have to wait. As the two spoke, they walked to the shelf inside. When they saw that the long box that should have been placed on this shelf was not there, they couldn't help but look at each other. Did the manager say that the tiger bone tendons were placed in a long black box on this shelf? The elder who knew medicine asked as he looked at the elder beside him. The old man at the side stroked his beard and nodded. Yes, we were talking about this place just now. We've been to this warehouse before, so when he wanted to bring us here, I indicated that he didn't need to follow us. After all, this place is so big, how can we not find it? But now, where is it? Could it be that he remembered the wrong place? The old man who knew medicine looked around and walked around, but he didn't see any boxes that could contain tiger bones and tendons. The old man at the side glanced at him before calling out in a deep voice, "Head steward." When the head steward, who had been waiting outside, heard his name being called, he hurriedly bent his waist and lowered his head as he quickly walked over to the two of them. Just as he was about to salute them, he heard an inquiring voice. "What about the tiger bones and tendons? Didn't he say to put it here? Why don't I see him?" The old man asked. Hearing this, the head steward was startled. He raised his head and said, "The tiger bones and tendons are placed here." As soon as he said this, he saw that there was nothing on the shelf. He couldn't help but be stunned. How did it disappear? It was clearly here. I even came in yesterday to check, the item was clearly placed here. But it's very obvious that this item isn't here. Chapter 3954. That's impossible. All the valuable items in our auction house are stored here. The manager wiped off his cold sweat as he spoke. He looked around anxiously, but he didn't find anything. Then did someone sneak in? As the old man spoke, his gaze instantly turned sharp. That's even more impossible. Aside from being guarded both inside and outside, this storeroom is also filled with traps. It's impossible for someone to open the traps and enter. The manager's face turned paler as he spoke. This item wasn't lost, nor was it stolen. It could only be considered as him losing it. If it was any other time, it wouldn't be a big deal. However, right now, he needed to use the tiger bone tendon to treat that elder. If he lost the main medicinal ingredient, he wouldn't be able to bear the blame if his superiors were to blame him. Looking at the storeroom that stretched as far as the eye could see, the old man frowned and said, "Hurry up and look for it. If you can't find it, go to other places to see if there are any more. Send it over as soon as possible, so as not to delay the treatment." "Yes." The head steward hurriedly responded. Seeing the two of them walk out, he turned around to look, and finally left with them. After they left, Fengjiu quietly appeared in the space. Thinking about their conversation just now, her eyes flashed. She didn't expect that someone on this mainland had already heard about their news and was preparing to make a move on her. Did they want to snatch the ancient golden lotus? Or did they want to use her to become famous in all the lands? Her strength had plummeted. Ha! Just because her strength had plummeted, did that mean she could be trampled on by others? If there really was someone who didn't know the difference between life and death, she didn't mind moving her hands and feet and letting them know her methods. A cold look flashed across her cold eyes. She didn't intend to take away all the treasures in this storeroom, but now, the corners of her beautiful lips curled up slightly, revealing a wicked smile. Since they had their eyes on her, it would be a waste if she didn't take it. She would first collect all the treasures in this storeroom. With a thought, she waved her sleeve and all the treasures inside were taken into her space. She quietly exited the warehouse, but did not leave the auction house immediately. Instead, she concealed her aura and walked in the night. She came to a dark place and saw the two old men from before sitting and talking in the front hall. Not far away, a maidservant carrying a cup of tea was walking towards her. The corners of her lips curled up slightly. Her figure quietly moved forward, and while no one was paying attention, she took the tea from the maidservant's hands. At the same time, she covered the maidservant's mouth with one hand and dragged her to a dark place. Not long after, Fengjiu, who had changed into the servant girl's clothes, came out with a cup of tea. She combed her hair with one hand and touched her face with the corner of her mouth raised. Only then did she walk forward with small steps. In the hall, one of the old men said, "We've just received news that His Majesty will arrive in the second half of the night. He wants us to prepare first. When he arrives, we'll make our move so that they won't be able to escape this town." Fengjiu, who was wearing the servant girl's clothes, lowered her head and poured tea for one of them. Then she carried a tray to the other person's side and placed another cup of tea on the table. Just as she was about to leave with the tray, the old man who had taken a sip of tea looked at the tea and then looked at the maidservant. "Did you make this tea?" "Yes." Fengjiu didn't raise her head and only slightly bent her knees in response. Chapter 39:55. No, I just feel that the taste of this tea is very special. It is very light and carries the fragrance of bamboo leaves. The old man said, then looked at the servant girl and asked, "What kind of tea is this?" "This is green bamboo spiritual tea. It is brewed from the new tea before the rain and bamboo leaves, so it has the fragrance of bamboo leaves." Fengjiu said in a low voice, with a trace of timidity in her voice, but in her heart, she was chuckling. When she knocked the servant girl unconscious and dragged her to a corner, she picked 2 tender bamboo leaves and put them in the tea to cover up the colorless and odorless medicine. She did not expect the old man to say that the tea had a special taste. Well, she added the ingredients to the tea and personally served it to the two of them. How could it not taste good? "Go pack some of these tea leaves and take them with me," the old man said, indicating for her to leave. "Yes." Fengjiu replied, slightly bending her knees before leaving. When she turned to leave, the corners of her lips curled up and she thought to herself, "I'm afraid that after drinking it once, you won't want to drink it a second time." She went to the backyard and when she reached a place where there was no one, she threw the tea tray to the side. She reached out and lifted the servant girl's robe, revealing the red dress she was wearing underneath. She turned back to look and a smile appeared on her face. In the next moment, the tip of her foot lightly tapped the ground and she flew into the air. About the time it took for a stick of incense to burn after she left, the head steward rushed into the front hall with a pale face. "Elders, I heard from the guards that a servant girl came to serve tea. Did the two of you drink it?" His anxious voice was filled with worry and his eyes anxiously looked at the 2 people in the hall, as well as the cups of tea that were already empty. Looking at the cups of tea and then at the 2 elders, he felt his heart sink. When the 2 of them heard his words, they could not help but look at each other. One of them said, "Just now, a servant girl came to serve tea. What about it?" The head steward opened his mouth, but did not say a word for a long time. "Is there a problem with that servant girl? Speak." Another old man shouted with a deep frown. Just now, the guards discovered an unconscious maidservant in the corner of the fake mountain. As the chief steward spoke, the 2 men's expressions suddenly changed. "This tea." One of the old men looked at the old man who knew medicine and asked. However, his throat seemed to be choked with something. He could only say 2 words and couldn't ask anything else. When the servant girl came in, she only served them 2 cups of tea. If there was a problem, the problem would lie in the tea. "The tea that I drank just now did not have the smell of any medicine. The only thing it had was the fragrance of the bamboo leaves," the old man who knew medicine said. However, even though he said that, his face turned even paler. It was precisely because of this that he realized that something was wrong. Almost immediately, he reached out to check his own pulse. After checking his pulse, he slumped into the chair, as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out. "How is it?" the old man asked anxiously and stood up abruptly. However, when he stood up abruptly, he felt his vision blur. His limbs felt weak and he fell back down. Chapter 39:56. As he watched his cultivation slowly dissipate, no matter how calm the elder was, his face was now filled with shock and fear. His face was deathly pale and his lips trembled. He wanted to speak but could not because he was in disbelief. Hiss. When the chief manager saw this scene, he sucked in a breath of cold air and fell to the ground. This was the complete dissipation of his cultivation. At this moment, wisps of smoke also rose from the top of the other elder's head. He no longer struggled and only muttered with an ashen face, "So that's how it is. So that's how it is." In less than half an incense stick's worth of time, the two elders' cultivation had completely dissipated. As their cultivation dissipated, their appearance also underwent a great change. Their entire being instantly aged like a person who had one foot in the coffin and was about to die. "Investigate. Investigate for me." One of the elders spoke. His hoarse voice was no longer full of vigor. Instead, it was filled with a sense of weakness and powerlessness. The moment he opened his mouth, his loose teeth fell out of his mouth and fell to the ground. The head steward hurriedly scrambled out of the room. Just as he stood up outside, his legs gave way and he fell to the ground again. It was as if he could already see his own end. It would definitely be more terrifying than what they were experiencing now. This is bad, head steward." A middle-aged steward hurriedly ran in with a pale face. When he saw the head steward sitting on the ground, he hurriedly stepped forward to help him up. He hurriedly said, "Head steward, this is bad. This is bad. What's wrong now?" The head steward used his strength to stand up and asked weakly. "Haven't enough things happened today?" The two elders' cultivation had completely dissipated and they did not even know who had done it. Right now, what could be more serious than this? "Head steward, the tiger bones and tendons have disappeared. I wanted to go to the storeroom to search, but who would have thought that when I went in, everything in the storeroom had disappeared?" the steward said anxiously, his face full of fear. The items in the storeroom were priceless. Not to mention losing everything, even if one item was lost, they would not be able to bear the consequences. However, who would have thought that the treasures in the storeroom had all been taken away by someone? What? The head steward, who had just stood up, felt his vision darken and he almost fainted from the impact. Everything in that storeroom has been emptied. Not a single one was left behind. As the steward spoke, he hurriedly supported the steward and asked, "Steward, what do we do now?" The head steward was stunned for a long time. He grabbed the steward beside him tightly and muttered, "Help me back to rest. We'll talk when the Lord comes up. We'll talk when the Lord comes up." He didn't know what to do. Send someone to look for him. Where can I find it? He couldn't find anything even after searching aimlessly all over the city. His mind was in a mess right now. He was both flustered and fearful. He could only wait until he calmed down. Compared to the chaos on this side, Feng Jiu quietly avoided the people guarding outside the inn and returned to the inn's room. As soon as she entered, she saw that Xianyuan Mose was still sitting at the table reading a book, while the two children were already asleep on the small bed. "You're back?" Xianyuan Mose asked as he took out a cup and poured her a glass of water. "Did you find anything?" Chapter 39:57. As she spoke, she took a sip of tea and said, "The people from the auction house intend to make a move against us. Moreover, their lord or whatever will come, and I reckon that Azura King we met last time will be there as well." So, I'm thinking, should we lie low for a while? You're worried about the two children? Xian Yuanmos asked. And, after all, they are still so young. I'm not afraid of fighting with those people, but I'm worried about the two children. She paused and gently shook the teacup in her hand before continuing, moreover, that monk told me last time that I would encounter a bloody disaster this time. So, I'm worried that I won't be able to take care of the two children. His words can't be trusted. Xian Yuanmos said as she took a sip of tea. She didn't think that the monk's words could be trusted. Fengjiu smiled and said, he is indeed someone with some ability. Although we can't completely trust him, we can't not trust him. She looked at the sky outside and said, there is still some time before the second half of the night. I'll go refine the tiger bone tendons into a pill for you to take. However, I reckon that tonight won't be peaceful. We have to let them be more vigilant. Go into the space and refine it. That way, even if someone attacks, they won't disturb you. Xian Yuanmos said as her gaze shifted to the two children she was familiar with, as for the two children, let them stay here. I will take care of them. Fengjiu paused for a moment before saying, all right, I will try my best to hurry. After saying that, she walked out of the room and told Leng Hua and Leng Shuang to take care of things. Then, she turned around and entered the room. Her figure flashed into the space. At midnight, a group of people appeared in the sky. They flew across the sky and directly arrived at the auction house. When the group of people entered the auction house's main courtyard, the cultivators waiting in the courtyard immediately bowed respectfully when they saw the person in the lead. Greetings, Lord. The people in the courtyard shouted in unison, bowing their heads and cupping their hands in salute. The leader was wearing a mask. He looked at the people in front of him and frowned slightly. He asked in a deep voice, why is it only you guys? Hearing these words, everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to say. They could only lower their heads. Seeing this, the head manager helplessly took a step forward and said in a trembling voice, Master, the two elders' cultivations have been crippled. The air became oppressive and cold because of these words. The black-robed masked master exuded a gloomy and powerful aura. He reached out and lifted the head steward up. What did you say? That voice was gloomy and terrifying. The chief steward, who was lifted up, turned pale and didn't dare to struggle. He could only report the matter to him in a trembling voice. That's how it is. This subordinate is useless. This subordinate has failed in his duty. Master, please punish me. He did not dare to beg for mercy. He only asked for forgiveness. Bang! With a loud bang, the head manager was thrown to the ground. The sound of bones breaking could be heard, but no one dared to help him up, and no one dared to plead for him. The head steward painfully groaned. He clenched his teeth and got up, but he didn't leave. Instead, he knelt in the corner. So you don't know who schemed against them? The Lord asked in a gloomy voice. Chapter 39:58. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a murderous aura fill the air. The head manager's legs went soft, and he fell to his knees with a thump. He hurriedly said, Master, although this subordinate is unable to find out who did it, I'm afraid that in this city, only the ghost Dr. Fengjiu and her group have the ability to do so. He lowered his body and knelt on the ground, pressing his forehead against the ground. When he felt the murderous aura surrounding him recede a little, he secretly sighed in relief and said, It's just that this subordinate's strength is too low, and I really don't dare to act rashly and alert the enemy. I can only wait for Master to arrive. Fengjiu. The Master lightly twirled his large black finger, his cold gaze penetrating. Everyone says that the ghost Dr. Fengjiu, as a woman, has leapt to become the master of heaven and earth, standing above all the experts. I'd like to see if she's really as powerful and invincible as the rumors say. Master, that Fengjiu and her group have entered the city. This subordinate heard that they have 2 children with them, and one of them is sitting in a wheelchair with limited mobility. The kneeling head manager hurriedly reported the news he had heard. The master's eyes flashed, and a cold glint flashed through his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Gather the troops. Surround them. I want to meet them personally." "Yes." The head manager hurriedly responded, and then stood up to quickly arrange things. At the inn, it was the dead of the night, the time when people were sleeping soundly. However, at this time, Du Fan and the others had already dispersed the people in the inn. "Go, go. Hurry and go." Hui Lang shouted, as he picked up a man and threw him out of the inn, "Go and stay somewhere else. This inn won't accept anyone tonight. You're going too far." A man was chased out, and he angrily and hurriedly tidied up his slightly messy robes. He glared angrily at Hui Lang and said, "You're all bandits. Chasing us out in the middle of the night, where do you want us to go to rest? You're really too reckless. Ah, don't pull on my clothes. I'll go myself. A man was pulled out, and his clothes were pulled up to his neck, causing him to shout with a pale face. Wei Feng loosened his grip and put him down. He glanced at him and snorted lightly, "Wouldn't it be better if you said so earlier? You insisted that I had to drag you out before you were willing to come out. You know that we're saving you. You make it seem like we're bullying and humiliating you." A middle-aged man brought along a pair of young children as he walked out. They were guests of the inn as well, but they were woken up in the middle of the night and chased out of the inn. Even though they weren't members of large clans, they were from small clans, so the middle-aged man was originally slightly displeased and unable to understand their crude actions of chasing people away yet not harming them. However, after he heard Wei Feng's words, his heart was slightly moved. Could it be that we'll encounter danger while staying in this inn? The middle-aged man asked, and he could be considered to be polite. Wei Feng glanced at him when he saw this, and then he said, "It's not that we'll encounter danger. But I reckon that this inn will be surrounded in a moment. Even though those people came for us, if they make a move against us, then it'll be unavoidable to affect all of you. So I drove all of you away." The middle-aged man's expression went grim when he heard this, and he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed. "Thank you, young master, for informing us. We'll be leaving first." Chapter 39-59. The middle-aged man, who was leaving with his son and daughter, couldn't help but tense up when he saw this scene. He hurriedly protected his son and daughter and retreated far away, his eyes looking at the inn worriedly. In this day and age, who would care about the life and death of others like them? He was originally annoyed that he had been woken up in the middle of the night, but when the other party told him the reason, he couldn't help but be convinced. Looking at the situation, the enemies of the youths in the inn should be these people, right? Looking at the cultivators surrounding the inn, each of them had a reserved cultivation base. With a single glance, one could tell that they were experts. He couldn't help but worry for those youngsters. "Father, there are so few of them. Will they be killed by these people?" The young girl tightly hugged her father's arm and hid half of her body behind her father. She looked at the scene with fear. Killing intent filled the air. Even though they had retreated to a corner, they could still clearly feel the cold and oppressive aura. The middle-aged man sighed, "That shouldn't be the case. They seem to be quite strong." Although he didn't know the strength of the people in the inn, he saw that none of the men were panicked. Furthermore, they clearly knew that their enemies would come. Perhaps they had a card up their sleeves. In the middle of the night, aside from those who had been chased out of the inn, there was no one else on the street. Those who were still complaining and unwilling to leave, when they saw the cultivators surrounding the inn, their expressions changed and they immediately retreated without caring about anything else. Because the target of these people was Fengjiu and the others in the inn, they only coldly glanced at them. When they saw them retreat, they didn't make things difficult for them. The group of cultivators flying in the sky were 8 cultivators carrying a palanquin. The group of cultivators stopped in front of the inn. The curtain of the palanquin was lifted, revealing a masked man sitting inside. "We greet the Lord." Everyone respectfully knelt down. When the middle-aged man who had retreated far away with his children saw the badges on the arms of the 8 people who were carrying the palanquin, as well as the mark on the palanquin, his face instantly turned ghastly pale. His body trembled, and he quickly covered the mouths of his children and led them away. The man sitting in the palanquin looked at the brightly lit inn in front of him while twirling the fingers on his thumb. He glanced around and asked, "The Azura King's men haven't arrived yet?" A cultivator respectfully said, replying to the Lord, "They still haven't arrived." "Chi, cowards. It seems that after suffering once, you're afraid of them." The man in the palanquin sneered. Contempt and disdain flashed across his eyes. He stared at the inn in front of him as a word filled with icy killing intent came out from his mouth. It was clearly transmitted into everyone's ears and reverberated in the air. "Attack!" "Yes." The cultivators received the order and responded in a deep voice. They stood up and drew their swords from their waists. Spiritual energy surged from their bodies. In the next moment, the surrounding people attacked the inn from all directions. Chapter 3960. However, when the sword Chi slashed towards the inn, it seemed to have hit some kind of defensive barrier and was bounced back. The cultivators who rushed into the inn were also kicked out when they rushed into the inn. Bang, bang, bang. Ah! The sound of heavy kicks hitting the cultivators' bodies rang out. The force of the kicks was so heavy that their sternum was broken and their internal organs were damaged. Some of them couldn't help but cry out in pain. They lost their balance and flew out, landing heavily on the ground outside the inn and in front of the sedan. Pooh! Fresh blood spurted out of the cultivators' mouths and splattered all over the ground. The cultivators raised their hands to wipe the blood from the corners of their mouths and tried to stand up. However, they found that they had no strength and fell back down. They were both shocked and anxious. They were shocked because they fell in front of the sedan and were afraid that their master would punish them for their incompetence. The more anxious they were, the more blood flowed out of their mouths. In the sedan, the masked man looked at the cultivators who had fallen in front of him with a gloomy gaze. He swept a glance at the cultivators on the ground and raised his hand. The people on the left and right of the sedan stepped forward and brought the cultivators to the side. At this moment, the inn's door creaked open. Du Fan walked out with a smile, gently fanning himself with a fan in his hand. Beside him were Chi Kong and Hui Lang. The rest of the people stood guard in other parts of the inn to prevent those people from attacking the inn from other places. "What are you doing here so late at night instead of sleeping?" Du Fan asked with a smile. His face was filled with a kind of amiable smile, but his eyes were cold. The masked man in the sedan looked at them. His eyes flashed and he sneered, "I'm relieved to see you here." These people were here, which meant that the ghost Dr. Fengjiu was here as well. Chi Kong had been discreetly sizing up the person in the palanquin ever since he came out. However, he realized that even with his cultivation, he could not see through the other party's strength. Therefore, he lowered his voice and said to Du Fan and Hui Lang, "This person is very strong. We should be careful." Upon hearing Chi Kang's words, Hui Lang looked at the person in the palanquin in surprise. He couldn't see his face because he was wearing a mask, but his aura was indeed very strong. Hence, he said, "No matter how strong he is, can he be stronger than Master and Madam?" In his opinion, Master and Madam were already rare experts in the world. No matter how strong he was, he would not be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. It's better to be safe than sorry. As Chi Kong spoke, he moved his hand and a long sword appeared in his hand with a swoosh. He pointed it diagonally to the ground. The long sword was suffused with a sharp cold light, reflecting a cold light in the night. Go meet them. The man in the palanquin did not take action. Instead, he signaled for the cultivator beside the palanquin to go out and fight. Yes. The three cultivators stood out at the same time. Their figures dashed out in an instant. They did not hold any weapons in their hands, but a powerful airflow condensed in their palms and suddenly attacked Du Fan and the other two in front of them. Swoosh! 3 streams of energy shot out from the palms of the 3 cultivators, like ferocious tigers pouncing towards them. The ferocity of their auras caused Du Fan's team of 3 to feel a powerful will to fight and killing intent radiating from them. Split up. Chapter 3961. The man sitting in the palanquin watched the 6 of them fight. His hand tapped on his thigh from time to time, as if there was some sort of rhythm to it. Seeing that the 3 cultivators were at a disadvantage against Du Fan and the others, he didn't show any signs of anxiousness and continued to sit there as before. When the 6 people in the air had been fighting for half an incense stick's worth of time, one of the cultivators was struck down by Qi Kong. The man in the palanquin shot out like lightning. No one saw how he attacked, but in the blink of an eye, he was already in front of Qi Kong. Qi Kong only felt a strong gust of air carrying a cold murderous aura. He didn't even have time to react before his chest was hit by the other party. With a loud bang, his whole body fell backward. Qi Kong. When Du Fan and Hui Lang saw this, they couldn't help but be shocked. Their expressions instantly changed. In their momentary distraction, the 2 of them were struck by the wind blades in the hands of the 2 cultivators. Blood seeped out of their arms. You're courting death. Du Fan's expression turned cold. He spun the fan in his hand and a sharp blade emerged from the fan with a whoosh, instantly cutting the throat of the cultivator opposite him. Ah! With a short scream, the cultivator's body convulsed and he fell straight to the ground. With a bang, he fell to the ground. Blood flowed out of his mouth, and the blood from his throat also seeped onto the ground. After a while, he breathed his last. After being attacked, Grey Wolf's instinctive reaction was to counterattack. However, the opponent dodged very quickly, allowing him to avoid a fatal blow, but one of his arms was chopped off by him. Hiss! The cultivator sucked in a breath of cold air and roared. His arm was chopped off and blood splattered everywhere. His figure quickly retreated and he staggered to the ground. Qi Kong, how are you? After killing that cultivator, Du Fan turned around and caught Qi Kong who had fallen to the ground. He supported Qi Kang's body that had lost its balance. When he saw that Qi Kang's face was pale and blood was flowing out of the corner of his mouth, he couldn't help but feel his heart sink. Fan Lin. Fan Lin, who was guarding the other side of the inn, was repelling the cultivators who were planning to sneak into the inn when he heard Du Fan's anxious shout from the front. He immediately responded, coming. As soon as he spoke, his figure quickly moved forward. When he arrived in front of them, he saw a masked man in front of Du Fan and Qi Kong. He was condensing a powerful airflow in his palm, preparing to attack the 2 of them. Be careful. He shouted loudly and did not retreat to avoid the attack. Instead, he quickly ran forward because he saw Qi Kang's face was deathly pale, and his body was swaying unsteadily. If he received this attack again, he was afraid. Don't come over. When Du Fan saw Fan Lin running over, his expression changed drastically, and he cried out in alarm. He was a little far away from them, so he might not have sensed the powerful aura of destruction. However, they could clearly sense that it was the aura of a divine king. This masked man in front of him was a god-king level powerhouse. With such strength, let alone them, even if all of them worked together, they wouldn't be able to withstand his attack, let alone them. The aura of a divine king was released in an instant. That destructive aura made them break out in cold sweat. Their bodies stiffened as they stood there, unable to dodge. Chapter 3962. The aura of death enveloped them at that moment. It had been a long time since they had experienced something like this, and all they could feel was a chill running down their spines. This was the aura of a divine king. This was the terror of a divine king. Even if there was only a difference of one level, a divine king could easily kill them. However, wasn't it said that there were no powerful cultivators in this area and that there was no ruler of the heavens and earth? How could there be a god-king level expert here? Furthermore, they had never heard of such a person before. However, just as they watched the powerful aura of a divine king engulf them and watched as the destructive aura of the attack swept towards them, a black figure suddenly appeared behind them and blocked their path. Before they could react, he had already pushed them aside and pushed them back to the door of the inn. Rumble. The two powerful airflows suddenly collided with each other, erupting with a terrifying pressure. In the air, the energy flow surged, as if a large stone had been thrown into a calm lake, ripples spread out on the water surface. The moment the aura rippled out, the sand on the ground was swept up and everything in the surroundings was swept away. The cultivators who were guarding the palanquins had no choice but to lower their bodies and press down on the palanquins to block the powerful aura. When the aura gradually dissipated, they raised their heads to look and saw that a handsome man dressed in black robes was standing in front of their master. His ink-black hair was tied up high and his cold face was handsome with the charm of a resolute and mature man. His brows were slightly furrowed as he looked in front of him with a trace of displeasure. His deep eyes were like a bottomless abyss, mysterious and unfathomable. Under his tall nose, his sexy thin lips were slightly pursed. He had one hand behind his back and the other in front of his abdomen. His low-key yet luxurious black robes accentuated his slender physique. Even if he did not open his mouth, the intimidating aura of a sovereign overlooking the world was fully displayed, causing people to lower their heads in front of him, not daring to look him in the eye. Its master. Hui Lang was pleasantly surprised to see his master who had suddenly appeared. His face broke into a wide smile and his initial worries disappeared without a trace when he saw his master. "It's the Yama Lord who saved us." Du Fan exhaled softly. Although he was shocked, he also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Under such circumstances, he thought that they would definitely die. He did not expect the Yama Lord to save them. Furthermore, during this period of time, he had always known that his master had been treating the Yama Lord's legs. He also knew that the Yama Lord's legs were already able to stand up and walk. But this was the first time he did not appear in his wheelchair. Instead, he stood before them and blocked the danger and murderous intent. Cough. Chi Kong coughed, and blood flowed out of his mouth again. Fan Lin, who was beside him, saw this and quickly came to his senses. He went forward to support him. "Quick! Let's go in." As he spoke, he helped her into the room, ignoring the battle outside. "Grey Wolf, you go inside. I'll stand guard here," Du Fan said, letting Grey Wolf go inside to guard. He gave him a look, indicating the two young masters in the guest room upstairs. Chapter 3963. The surrounding people retreated, leaving only Xianyuan Mose and the masked man standing there with his hands behind his back. Looking at Xianyuan Mose, who was wearing a black robe and emitting a powerful aura, the masked man's eyes flashed. He stared at him coldly and asked, "Are you the Azure Dragon Sovereign, Xianyuan Mose?" Although it was a question, his tone was very certain. It was obvious that there was no one else who could have such a powerful aura other than Xianyuan Mose. Xianyuan Mose glanced at him coldly, but didn't reply. Instead, his figure flashed, and his black figure shot out like a bolt of lightning, attacking the masked man at a speed that was too fast for one's ears to hear. The masked man's heart skipped a beat when he felt the powerful pressure. He didn't dare to be careless. He gathered all of his strength in his palm to meet Xianyuan Mose's attack, but he didn't expect that when the two streams of air collided, there would be a loud rumble, and the powerful air pressure would hit him in the face with a bang. Crack! With a crack, the masked man was sent flying. The mask on his face could not withstand the powerful force and cracked. It fell to the ground with a clang, revealing his true face. Pfft! The blood in his body surged. He felt salty in his throat and spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered back. When he finally steadied himself, he saw a palm coming towards him. It was so fast that he could not dodge it. He could only take it head-on. Bang! Ah! There was a loud sound, followed by a scream. This time, he lost his balance and flew out. He crashed into the wall of a shop not far away. Because of the great force, a large part of the wall collapsed. The wall collapsed and the masked man was buried under the rubble. Dust filled the air and the masked man's figure could not be seen for a moment. Master! Cries of alarm rang out. The cultivators all ran forward in shock. Xianyuan Mose didn't plan on letting him go just like that. Instead, he walked forward step by step, releasing a powerful pressure that filled the air. The cultivators who were rushing forward felt their hearts tremble, and they couldn't help but retreat. His pace was neither fast nor slow. Every step he took seemed to be stepping on the hearts of the cultivators, causing them to only feel fear and panic. They wanted to go forward, but they didn't dare to. In the current situation, if they went forward, they would only be killed. As for the cultivators carrying the palanquin, although they were afraid, they still raised their swords and slashed at Xianyuan Mose. However, with their strength, in Xianyuan Mose's eyes, they were nothing more than children wielding swords. They were not worth mentioning at all. He did not even look at them. With a wave of his hand, a powerful force struck out. With one strike, each of them spat out blood and fell to the ground. Pfft! Ah! Chapter 3964. However, at this moment, a loud crash sounded from within the inn, followed by Hui Lang's cry of alarm. Little masters! Almost as soon as he heard Hui Lang's cry of alarm, Xianyuan Mose immediately turned around and dashed towards the inn. His speed was as fast as the wind. However, no matter how fast he was, he could not outrun the Demon King who was hoisting the two children into the air. Wah! Wah! The two children were woken up from their sleep and were hoisted into the air by their sleeves. The night breeze was slightly chilly, causing the two little fellows' faces to turn red. They did not know fear, they only knew that they had not slept enough and had been woken up. Hence, they instinctively began to bawl loudly. The children's cries rang out clearly in the night. However, it scared Du Fan and the others so much that their limbs went limp and their hearts were raised high. Let go of the little masters. Let go of the little masters and I'll spare your life. Let go of the little masters. Du Fan and the others shouted angrily. Even though they knew that he would never let go of the little masters, they still yelled at him loudly. This was the first time that the little masters had been placed in such a dangerous situation in front of them. Their minds were in a mess as they were afraid that the Demon King would hurt the two little masters. Xianyuan Mose watched as his children were hoisted into the air. He watched as the blankets covering the two children had fallen off, leaving only a thin layer of clothing covering their bodies. He watched as they waved their arms and legs and wailed. His entire being felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar, his entire body chilled to the bone. Under his sleeves, his hands were tightly clenched into fists. He watched as his children hoisted him up and stared arrogantly at the Demon King below. A monstrous murderous intent churned in his eyes. Let go of them and I'll spare your life. His low and deep voice was icy cold as a powerful aura filled the air. As soon as he finished speaking, he paused between each word and said, "If you harm even a single hair on their heads, I will make you suffer a fate worse than death even if you run to the ends of the earth." Those words struck the hearts of the crowd like a thunderbolt, causing a loud boom in their minds. Those sharp and cold words filled with murderous intent reverberated over and over again. Azura King, who was hovering in mid-air with the two children in his hands, was shocked when he heard Xianyuan Mo's words. However, he only sneered. The mask on his face concealed his expression, and only his gloomy and arrogant voice could be heard. With Ghost Dr. Fengjiu and the Azure Dragon Sovereign's son and daughter buried with us, I think it's a win-win situation. As he spoke, he even lifted the child up and waved it in front of him. Damn it! Hui Lang clutched his chest and wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth. He clenched his teeth as he watched his two young masters being taken away by the Azura King. His heart was filled with anxiety and self-blame. He did not expect that the Azura King would suddenly appear out of nowhere, and even more did he expect that the little masters they had been heavily protecting would still fall into his hands. If anything were to happen to the two little masters, even if he were to die 100 or 1,000 times, it would not be enough to atone for his dereliction of duty. Wah wah. Wah wah. The two children cried loudly. Their cries tugged at everyone's heartstrings, but there was nothing they could do. They could only watch helplessly as they fell into a passive situation. Chapter 3965. When she finished refining the pills in the cauldron, she slapped the cauldron with her palm and 3 pills flew into her hand. After looking at the pills in her hand, she put them in a bottle and used her divine sense to scan the outside. Her expression changed drastically when she used her divine sense. With a flick of her sleeve, she appeared in the room. However, a large corner of the room was destroyed. Hearing the children's cries, she quickly walked out. The children were no longer on the small bed. Next to the small bed, Leng Shuang, Bai Qingqing, and Qin Xian were lying unconscious on the ground. Except for Qin Xian and Bai Qingqing, who were unconscious because of a frontal attack, Leng Shuang's wound was pierced through his back. There was another penetrating wound on his back and blood was oozing out from the front. Leng Shuang. Seeing that the 3 of them were not in good condition, she quickly helped Leng Shuang up and fed him a pill. At this moment, Leng Hua rushed over after fighting off 2 cultivators. He also quickly helped Qin Xian and Bai Qingqing up. Ignoring his sister's injury, he could only say, "Master, the 2 little masters. I saw it." As Fengjiu spoke, he looked coldly at the figure in the air. He was holding her 2 children in one hand. In the night wind, the 2 little fellows' faces were red from the cold. Their cries gradually became hoarse. Her heart clenched tightly. Take good care of them. As Fengjiu spoke, he handed the 3 children to Leng Hua. He stood up, walked to the gap, and rose into the air. Her red dress fluttered and her black hair fluttered in the wind. Her beautiful face was as cold as ice, but it was fatally attractive. She looked at the Demon King and spoke in a cold voice. It's just 2 children. What can you do with them? Why don't I exchange them for the 2 children? As soon as she said this, Du Fan and the others couldn't help but cry out, "Master, you can't. Master, even if you want to exchange them, we should be the ones doing it." "I'll do it. I'll do it." Hui Lang shouted and said to the Demon King, "Let them go and I'll be your hostage." Ha! The Demon King sneered and his cold gaze swept across their faces. Finally, when his gaze fell on Xianyuan Mo's and Fengjiu, he revealed a strange and sinister smile. "If you don't want them to die, you two can have a good fight. I'd like to see how fierce the fight between the 2 of you will be." He stared at them with gloomy eyes, as if he recalled the time when he was defeated by Fengjiu, and his aura became even more gloomy. Remember. He had to give it his all. Don't hold back. If you hold back, then I don't mind sending one of your children to meet the King of Hell. Hearing his words, Du Fan and the others' expressions turned ugly. They glared angrily at the Demon King and wanted nothing more than to pounce forward and bite off a piece of flesh. He wants to force Master and Yama Lord to kill each other. Damn it! They knew that this was his scheme, but no one could stop him. No one could stop him. What should they do? How can they save the two little masters? You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.